And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, there's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. And I'm sure at this point it'd be actually true. But on the other hand, there is something else going on in the background about a phony starman that they're trying to roll out in relation to the real one. We got big problems, but also huge releases going on in the UFO file arena. Tonight, we're going to talk about it and go deep into the memory metal and the missing scientists. It all comes together in that huge first Trump release on getting these UFO files out. The general sort of lukewarm response is based on the fact that a lot of the files are stuff we've pretty much seen already. And then other things you wonder why they classify them in the first place. But nonetheless, there's some interesting things there that we're going to get into, and all of it sort of plays itself out. And, you know, we're sort of playing out history on a weekly basis right here on this show. When we were talking about the X technology coming forward and all these different things that were going to come into the arena, a lot of times, you know, it was largely a theoretical, and now we're living right in the heart of that. And I want to say this, that we'll go about an hour and a half with you tonight. In the second half of the program, we are going to take your questions. And so we'll get your response about what you thought of all this tonight. And right now, Miss Olivia is putting all those questions together. You can ask them anytime, but we'll get into them in part two. And what do you got over there?
I have Synergy Conscious saying, greetings of divine white Christ streaming light ideas room, DJ and Miss Olivia. It's awesome to be present for another golden opportunity to learn. And Made Dirty by Design says, DJ was fantastic on AJ today.
I had a great time with Alex, and you know, he has this whole new studio with Alex Jones Live because, of course, they hounded InfoWars to get them off the air, and boom, comes back bigger than ever. This is what they don't get, that when the mainstream media, the establishment, tries to pull somebody down, the public becomes even more and more curious about them. And we've seen that in our own situation as well with the intense censorship that we've experienced on this channel. It makes people more curious because they start to wonder what's going on there. And one of the most classic examples of that, of course, is my Joseph Farrell Mars video, which was pulled. I think it was up there for like 20 minutes, something like that. And it was pulled for impersonating a historical event. I shall never forget it. But we've had some real close calls with it. But by and large, we've been able to get our stuff out because we're just tenacious enough about it. The best way, especially if you're new here, to keep up with us, though, is to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter, which is a free newsletter that keeps us in touch around that heavy censorship. And you're going to learn in there about the exciting shows we have coming up for you. Incredible guests. I mentioned Farrell there, Gigi Young, just an incredible litany of fantastic people doing great work. And of course, the X series episodes to blow your mind, our docuseries, the Atlantis docuseries, The Craze in the Hot Zone, JFK and the UFO File. It's all there. Stand up and be counted. Go right to darkjournalist.com and sign up for that newsletter. I'm going to say that even though many people were disappointed in the UFO File release, I found some very interesting things that go right along with some of the very strange and unusual pieces that we've been presenting in the last few weeks. And as we have exploded that whole story about the missing scientists, we got more coverage this week as well. And I think this is great because the story gets out, which is the crucial thing. And very often when we do these kind of heavy duty things, it takes a couple of years for the word to get out. But in this case, you know, because we tend to run ahead of things, and I don't say it with a kind of an egotism. I say it from a researcher's point of view of looking out and being able to tap into areas and having a kind of antenna for these types of things. But we've seen it over and over again that we'll come up and we'll dime right into something that's going on. And in this case, it started off with the death of Lorero, which reminded me very much of these Star Wars SDI's deaths in the back of my head. And then I started to think about Penn Jones. And Penn Jones is this fantastic JFK researcher and his incredible tracking of the death lists around the JFK assassination. And when I went through that, I found the best researchers had all said this, yeah, this is absolutely real and absolutely detailed. And the odds were completely off the charts. So that let me know and made me very aware. And when I started to think a little along the lines of Penn Jones, I started to realize that the scientist's death in this case were very closely related. And we exploded that story like wildfire now through all these headlines. It's gone all the way up to the White House where they're investigating. I think that people inside the White House, certain individuals are trying to throw cold water on it because not only does it get certain agencies into trouble, but I think there's a lot at risk there. So we may not hear as much from them on it. I went into this and all these other matters today with Alex. And like I said, with his new Alex Jones Live, he's doing fantastic. I'm going to do a segment on there tomorrow at 2:00 in the afternoon, just recapping some of the stuff I'm going to present here tonight. And that should always be a blast. I always love getting that information out to Alex and his audience. And he has great questions as well. As you know, today was pretty good. We had a good time with it. But I do want to follow up on this because, you know, right off the bat, one of the things I pointed out when I was on Alex today was, you know, there's this whole thing about the Department of War. And the Department of War is now being tasked with doing all this. And so you're getting this Department of War UFO thing. And you got UFO war, Department of War, and this whole piece. And I'll tell you, if you look into it, I've pointed this out before, there is actually no such thing as the Department of War. It's the Department of Defense. And as a kind of courtesy, they're allowed to call it whatever they want. They could call it the Department of Captain Crunch if they wanted to. And it wouldn't matter because you're able to do that as an administration. However, if you want to really change the name of it, you have to go through a legislative process. Both houses of Congress have to vote on it. The president has to sign it. That's it. It takes a long and hard, good time. So this idea of the Department of War is largely a fiction on top, just like, you know, Homeland as the name for the United States doesn't quite pan out because, you know, the United States has a constitution. It has a rule of law. It has a whole system. Homeland is just, you know, some dreamed up thing and somebody's idea of total authoritarian control. So with that in mind, they put out this release. Department of War releases unidentified anomalous phenomena files in historic transparency effort. Don't get me wrong. I support and really, you know, really push for that transparency. And I think that we do get more transparency through the Trump administration. I think certain individuals are trying to spin that transparency into a threat capacity, capability. And then that gets us into the Golden Dome conversation, which comes in heavily tonight. But first, we're going to look at some of the things that they actually put on the record about this. So let's start with that. And I'm also going to show you how they emphasize the Apollo missions, which also to anyone who's been tracking this on the secret space side knows there's something very, very interesting about them highlighting a program which, after all, ended some 54 years ago. Before I jump in, what do you got over there?
Tim Houston says disclosure is happening right here. And Truthflow says, I'm hoping for a UFO file that says, hi, we're the government, and here's all the back-engineered tech we've been hiding from y'all.
They can't do it. They cannot do it. It exposes an entire system of trillions of dollars slipping out the back door in black budget projects. And it was funny, you know, our old pal, David Grush, who we've had these little interactions with when he first came out, and he was going to, you know, I thought he was all set to come on this show because we had this nice long conversation. And, you know, the thing that turned him away from doing it was this Chris Mellon connection. And, but he's been out there really talking up a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that he came out saying was that the entire effort was being thwarted by certain defense contractors sort of weaseling their way through the process in the background. So this is where the challenge is, the heart of the challenge. I'm going to read a little more from their press release today just to get the flavor of it. I'm going to show you some of the exhibits from, you know, it's funny. I thought about it. The video that they displayed was not very impressive. I got to tell you, it was just kind of little dots moving around and stuff. Nothing really dramatic, but there was one image, this kind of floating star image that I grabbed a shot of because I wanted to be able to talk about that and point everyone in that direction. Okay, so here's the Department of War's press release. Today, the Department of War announced the initial release of new, never-before-seen files on unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, as part of the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters, PURSUE. That's weird. PURSUE is odd because we have a whole program called BLUE inside the government, which I exposed in 2023, which was all about how we had built a lot of the secret space program to chase UFOs. So pursuit was certainly a big part of that. This interagency effort includes the White House, the ODNI, Department of Energy, and so on down the road they go, NASA and others. NASA comes up in a kind of sinister fashion around a lot of this as well. We'll get into it. The American people can now access the federal government's declassified UAP files instantly. I do want to say for those experts now who are watching this whole process, a lot of us were aware that some of the things they released we had seen before. You know, we'd seen a lot of the files before, we'd seen a lot of the images. Some of the video was new, some of the documents were new, but you know, there is a mix there. I mean, I've seen a lot of the stuff that they put out there already, and others have concurred. I've got some of their responses. The latest UAP videos and original source documents from across the entire United States government are all in one place, no clearance required. While past administrations sought to discredit or dissuade the American people, President Trump is focused on providing maximum transparency to the public, who can ultimately make up their own minds about the information contained in these files. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let's suppose on its face that the statement were true, that President Trump wanted maximum transparency on it. Question is, can a president achieve maximum transparency on the UFO file? A very key question. It's something that President Kennedy wondered all the way back in 1963. And all the evidence that we've seen is that no, president cannot. And yet here we have Trump again moving into this arena and taking on the challenge of trying to move the UFO file back under executive control. Now, regardless of where you fall on the political party lines, and regardless of what you think in relation to that, Trump's efforts around the UFO file by creating the Space Force in his first term, for example, and really by the general nature of how he's approached the presidency, you know, releasing the JFK files, for example, even though, you know, the CIA had obfuscated the trail there from the start. All these different aspects, I think, bring him into an arena where he wants those things on the table so he can use them, you know, he can deal those cards, as it were. And if we go back just a little bit, you watch this program, you know that the president has Uncle John Trump, you know, the late Uncle John Trump, looming in the background, someone who told him a great deal, really, about a number of things. He was, of course, was the person who was the protege of Vannevar Bush. And Vannevar Bush was the head of the UFO file. He sent in Trump to get the Nikola Tesla files. And so Donald Trump may have been the beneficiary of John Trump's incredible knowledge. And very often I've pointed out the whole musing, Uncle John kind of musing that Trump does. And I feel like it's always raising this kind of, you know, it's almost like raising the point to the deep state, saying, I know everything that Uncle John was able to notate. And Uncle John was a major player, of course, decorated with medals of science in the UK and in America by President Reagan. And, you know, a part of that whole system since the 1940s. He knew a great deal. He knew the UFO file. He knew the Tesla papers. He was the key man in the middle. And so Trump has that legacy. I don't know if Trump got out of touch with some of the UFO factors when he got into the presidency and was not really, if they're able to kind of sort of, get things past him in this environment. I get some of that impression. But we can see one thing he's clear about is moving that back, you see, because the battle to remove the UFO file from the executive branch goes all the way back to the Eisenhower administration. So we find ourselves in a weird tailspin in American history when we look at that, because it's the paperwork goes black, just like the money goes black. So the paperwork for tracking it, it's like, how do you actually do it? Because they're not going to talk about UFOs in their documents unless they have, these kind of flimsy committees like Blue Book or, OSAP, things of that nature, not very deep black programs. So it's very important for us to understand that President Eisenhower, at a certain point, and to his own amazement, lost control of that when it was signed over to aspects of corporate America. So we keep that in mind as we go along here. And the idea was, okay, there'll be no paper trail for all this. And I think that that's kind of a crucial factor. Now, what I will say is when they were thinking there would be no paper trail, they were saying, well, the corporations will hold it and, you can sue a corporation, but that's their private IP. But the government, you do have all kinds of means and ways of getting at this material. So I think that Eisenhower was very much to his own chagrin looking at that situation and saying, no, we're not able to do it. We need, to figure out how to do this. And he passed that knowledge along to President Kennedy, and there we were. So that situation now has existed some 60 years in the making. And that's how it's gone. So the question for us really becomes, how do you regain that? And I think for every president in the background, all the way through Nixon and certainly Reagan and others. And, in some cases, the deep state knew how to press their buttons. With Reagan, I think that they very much showed him and said, well, you've got these giant craft and they're reloading over the rings of Saturn. And they showed him images of that. And he became quite terrified of it and started regarding the UFOs as a threat. You have other presidents who just seem completely out of the loop. President Clinton certainly was one not on the inside in relation to the UFO file, even though Hillary Clinton had made all these attempts with Lawrence Rockefeller to get on that inside. And then later as a candidate would try to hook up with the CIA, TTSA effort. All those things are crucial to understand the release that takes place today. And I will say that on a scale of 1 to 10, today's release is probably a 2. It doesn't mean that as the releases go along, a 2 is better than nothing, but let's get real. I mean, there was nothing particularly important in these documents. However, the process itself and the naming of the process gets a much higher ranking because just the effort shakes that structure that's been in charge for so long. And its deepest and darkest element being the X-Protect group. We're going to get into them as well. Everyone, it's great to be here with you tonight. We're getting some version of Trump disclosure, as it were, on the UFO file. And it's great to be sharing that all with you out there. We are going to, like I said, go about 90 minutes with you here tonight. And then in the second, basically the last half hour, we're going to take your questions. What do you got?
Layton Grieve says, in regards to controlled disclosure, what are your thoughts on the meeting held by government and select pastors? Do you think this is to take heat off the Epstein files?
No, I think regard the Epstein stuff completely different from the UFO side of things, even though there are hints in his scientific work. He ran across some figures that were concerned with this question. But I feel like this idea that anything that happens that doesn't get the Epstein files is a distraction. Well, you can't do anything. You can't look into anything unless it has an Epstein spin to it. The Epstein case is important, but the way that they obfuscated it was by rolling it into everything else. So it's spread out in this way that it just becomes a kind of a street legend cliche. So we have to be careful. But I will say that the interesting part of your question goes to the pastor aspect, because a lot of these pastors came forward and said, I'm being contacted by government officials who are saying you have to prepare your flock. Well, that's kind of dicey language if you think about it. It's very interesting as well, in my opinion, because the idea is they're trying to do this and they're trying to use the Christian, fundamentalist Christian community and trying to figure out how they can roll out their version of what I call this false kind of CIA disclosure while using those groups. And that's why you see a lot of people out there like Vance and Anna Luna talking about all these biblical demonic aspects about UFOs. Look, the only thing Congress and how they believe in things, I don't care if the person is, you know, and Christian, Buddhist, or whatever. We're not supposed to even know when they're doing that in relation to legislation and things that we're getting. That's the separation of church and state straight up. And if anything, this government has kind of abused and persecuted Christians, as far as I can tell, and really, you know, try to keep Christ and all, the whole idea of deeper spirituality out of the institutions. And what's interesting to me is now they're using them. They're using their own faith against them. And they have these preachers coming out and saying like, oh, you know, this alien God is coming in, and don't worry, you know, we have to fight off these demons in order to do it. And the CIA is doing it, man. They're heroes. And that's okay that it costs trillions of dollars because they were fighting for justice against these demons. I remember in the early aspects of bringing out the Tom DeLonge stuff, and they used DeLonge as a Bobo. It's a CIA kind of classic operation. They have a Bobo front man. If the thing falls, they just put it on him and say, oh, you know, he did a little too much drugs while he was on the road. He was burnt out, you know, that kind of thing. The Bobo thing here worked really well because they were able to try all these different concepts through a CIA crafted corporation. And that corporation comes up over and over again because even in the missing scientist case, we have proven that McCasland was working directly with the early setup around TTSA, and we have the documents of DeLonge going to Podesta, trying to get him on board by saying, McCasland is, you know, he's helping me set up my disclosure, soft disclosure team, and that McCasland was in charge of everything relating to the Roswell wreckage in the lab at Wright-Patterson that controlled that. So, you know, those things are on the record. These things are hard in the warp and woof of the whole thing. A little more here from the Department of War. Yeah, Department of War. The American people can now access the federal government's declassified UAP files. Okay. The American people have asked for more transparency on these topics, and President Trump is delivering. While all the files have been reviewed for security purposes, many of the materials have not yet been analyzed for resolution or of any anomalies. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, says the Department of War is in lockstep with President Trump to bring unprecedented transparency regarding our government's understanding of unidentified anomalous phenomena. Yeah, but it's the Department of Defense. That's the question. See how this works. These files hidden behind classifications have long fueled justified speculation. It's time the American people see it for themselves. Okay, so all the rhetoric is on track and all the rest of it. Now, right off the bat, you know, you could say, well, we know that NASA airbrushed, we have people on the record, all these anomalies on the moon and Mars and other places, things that showed ruins or activities or other craft, whatever it was. So that could be the first thing that you go in and say, well, we know that NASA did this process. Why did they do it? And let's get to the bottom of that, you see. So there's a lot you can do besides saying, here's some files. You know, you can really do a real overhaul transparency process. Let's hope this is at least in that ballpark. And the other thing, there's a quote there from Kash Patel, who's been taking a lot of heat in general lately. And what it says is the FBI is proud to stand alongside President Trump and are interagency partners in this landmark release of UAP records. For the first time in history, the American people have unfettered access to declassified government files on unidentified anomalous phenomena, a level of transparency that no prior administration has delivered. The FBI remains committed to supporting this rolling declassification effort, and so on and so on. It's interesting to note that the person who set a lot of this in process, of course, goes all the way back to 1947, and that is Guy Bannister. And Guy Bannister, of course, came up with the X designation for the UFO files as well. So Guy Bannister also becomes the person who's coaching Lee Harvey Oswald in the summer of 1963, employing him to infiltrate student groups. So that, I think, maybe gets us into some interesting territory for the FBI. Yes.
What kind of a committee is this going through? Who is responsible for the releases, the rolling releases, and how often will they do another drop?
Yeah, they hint at it, and people like Luna have said, "Oh, there's another one coming." They don't. The timetable
I
is.
want deadlines, damn it!
I know.
Timelines.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of it's gone through the declass committee. Other things just are based again on Trump's somewhat interesting statement, and it was his big statement saying we need to release all these things. I've instructed the Department of War to do that and work with these other agencies to do it. So establishing a process, but they don't say who's doing that process exactly.
Well, that's not unfettered access. I mean,
Well, yeah,
comment.
That's true. And the other thing that's interesting about this, in my opinion, is they are saying some odd things because Trump never made this into an executive order, which is also, I would say, a little bit odd. In the sweep of his announcement, you would think everyone expected the executive order to come on the back of that, and yet we don't have anything like it. So we're in an odd place. Yeah, what do you got?
Ramlin Lamb said, value of the release aside, acknowledgement of the UFO file is an elementary step, in my opinion. The proverbial toothpaste is out now.
Well,
there's some truth to that.
Yeah, I mean,
but we should not be satisfied with that either.
I mean, Blue Book was an investigation. You could say the toothpaste was out with Blue Book too. You have to be a little bit careful, I would say, with all this, because what they're doing is they're basically shining a light. The most intense light is, as I said, they were shining a light on things relating to the moon landings and things like that. So we're going back. They were talking about Apollo 17. That was the lead story out of all this stuff. And I will get to that story as well. They showed, for example, NASA photograph. Well, this one was from the landing site of Apollo 12 and features a highlighted area of interest above the horizon here. So they finally released this. Now, like I said, they've had images like this that they airbrushed and got rid of the anomalies and the UFOs and things like that. So, and you have to ask yourself, why would they keep this? Literally, what's the point? Unless they wanted to hide UFOs because they knew what they were, but they didn't want to tell the public. So then you let this thing out loosey-goosey 55 years later, and you say, oh, hey, look at that in relation to one of our moon missions. But you don't explain, well, there was a secrecy program around the moon missions, and here's what they encountered. You do let little bits out there so that people start to get the idea that the Apollo missions were a lot different, say, than how they were presented. So it becomes interesting. I would say the most interesting was a craft that they had some video of. It's been referred to as the star UFO, and also the chandelier, which it does look like both. But we have this, a very, very unusual design for a UFO, and they have some moving video of this. I would say this is definitely one of the more unusual shapes and looks of a UFO here. No question about it. And the way that it moved, etc. I would say that was one of the few kind of highlights around this as well. So,
So there's no explanation with that whatsoever of it being a solid object, how large it was, anything?
they have usually some supplementary info included with it.
That one in particular.
Yeah,
Chandelier.
well, you know, some people have said it looked like there was another object with it, but no, it's just tracked on sensors and they have cameras with the sensors. So this is how a lot of it works. And then they'll tell us about different types of locations. One of the ones I thought was interesting and they only had an illustration for was a report that went all the way back to 1943. And it was somebody who really was behind enemy lines. And as far as like, it was someone who had seen in a forest in Germany a craft, 1943 Nazi Germany. And this is the description of that craft. Now you can see, and we've pointed this out before with people like John Warner talking about his grandfather, Paul Mellon, saying that when after the war, when he went there, that he went into some of their secret headquarters and in the mountain areas where they were making these things. And he found himself standing on top of a saucer-shaped craft that was a football field and a half large in diameter. Think about that. So that's what they had in 1945. We never saw that. We never saw, you know, the development of that. So there is suspicion out there that a lot of the craft came out of Nazi work. And we know we've seen that rolled out, but there's a factual basis for assuming some of that. The problem is, I think it overplays the hand to think that all of that would come out of Nazi activity. Yes. What else you got?
Chris Radzian says, looks like a magic bullet.
I think it's rather remarkable.
Mhm.
Its shape and things, and it is a classical. Now, of course, it could have been a UFO anomaly, but it apparently is a Nazi UFO. Another one that came up was something reported that was discovered in Illinois, and this is something that looked like some kind of a test disc device, and was not particularly large, but it had information on it that was Russian. That's from 1946, and it's disc shaped, recovered in Illinois. It was some kind of an early spy satellite. Something about that. It's not very well explained, but I think that this one's going to open up a little bit. And there was more on that. Yeah, there's some information on the photographer. I'm going to follow up on the photograph and the photographer involved in exactly how that was discovered, but it is in the tranche, as it were. Let's get into a few more of the.
Car Racer says the Stephenville, Texas UFO was reported as football field sized as well.
Oh, forget it. Stevensville was practically invaded. And I will say this in relation to Stevensville, that part of what was happening there were the craft were going, this is the wave that took place, I believe, in 2008. And the craft were going very, very close to President Bush's compound there in Stevensville. So that raised a lot of hackles in the background. That type of stuff, I believe there could be a third party operating that likes to intimidate the government, for example. And that could be the reason for some of that. I will say something else, which is the group, and I put this in our Roswell Reignited series, which really, those 4 episodes are kind of rewrite a lot of that scenario of Roswell and give us a lot of connections that weren't there. One of the things that it gives us, most importantly, is that the Fosters themselves have a very unusual history, and the Fosters were the ones who were, who owned the Roswell Ranch. Well, very interestingly, they were associated with a series of orphanages and did all this work through the Christian church there. And they became quite wealthy after the Roswell incident. And one of the people that they employed who oversaw all of their work later, all of their corporate work, for these orphanages and hospitals and things was the same person who had found Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle in the Texas School Book Depository. That was so stunning to me that I did 3 episodes on it, trying to get to the bottom of what was going on there. And I had a whistleblower in the background who still may come forward, a woman who grew up with that individual in those Christian orphanages. And she had told me that a number of people in Stevensville, where this foster group was operating, had hardcore alien abduction encounters inside of those orphanages. So did the Fosters accidentally bring the phenomena back to Texas with them? And what are the odds that the 2 great mysteries of history, Roswell and the Kennedy assassination, would crisscross like that? And, you know, the individual, of course, was Officer Boone, who had found the Oswald rifle, you know, and had hung out with Jack Ruby and stuff like that. Very, very odd. He's the one who ends up running the Roswell properties for the Fosters. It gets deep. You see, the entire situation gets deep, deep, deep. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 225. This is the UFO file alert, and it has to do with the incredible drop of files and from the Trump administration and the missing scientists' exotic tech bombshell. Yeah, there's an exotic tech bombshell in the heart of the missing scientist story. We're going to take your questions here, say in the next half hour or so. And before I go any further, what do you got?
Eli is asking, I just can't see how these UFOs got past the U.S. Air Force, airport radars, satellites, military surveillance. Of course they didn't. Can you address this?
Well, UFOs have frustrated all of our radar defenses and things like that. The stories not to believe are the drone swarm stories. For example, when you say a drone swarm came around a nuclear base, or, you know, our bases in Virginia and stuff, and just hung out, never happened in a million years. And when they're selling us that, they're selling us a bill of goods. You know, you have to think of it that way. Just like the whole thing with the Pentagon during 9/11. We had all sorts of rules of engagement for the skies because we had come out of the Cold War and developed all these air defenses that were set up to fight a nuclear war. So you'd never have, you know, a craft going near the Pentagon. You couldn't even bicycle by the Pentagon without getting grabbed. So that whole story went out the window. It's the same thing with UFOs. However, with drones. But when you get to the UFO file, this is not a technology that, you know, we've seen this over and over again, the stories of us firing at them and so forth. It is not a technology that we can keep up with and that we're compatible with technologically or on any kind of even keel with. I would say, you know, realistically, if the breakaway groups are 50 to 100 years beyond the public, then the UFO technology is far beyond those groups. And that's why they're trying to crack that code as well. So you see, we're in an unusual place when we start to get the technical details around this. We're starting to look at a situation where the answers get harder and harder to discern. But one thing is for sure, the group in charge right now on the technology side, on the UFO side, they've been hiding that information since the 1940s, at least, probably since World War I is my guess. And the mystery school secret society aspect going on in the background, it's an even deeper plot to that. But I'm just speaking on the kind of superficial scientific basis. Yeah, what do you got?
Again, Eli, and what about the thousands of citizens that may have seen something very questionable? How were they all silenced?
Well, I mean, a lot of them have come forward, right? And we have so many stories. I was thinking about a really funny thing. I wish I'd brought the picture. But, you know, Whitley Strieber was one of the, you know, major 80s contactees. And of course, he was an author. He wrote The Hunger and things like that. He's still around doing a show and is a big UFO expert, but he's actually had encounters as well. And one of the funny things is to look at that cover of that book, which is a big alien head, And then think, J.D. Vance, which is angel demon idea of UFOs, and UFOs are demons. But he calls his book what? Communion. So, there's some funny crisscross in that. But here's the thing. They did send out groups, and they, we have all the Men in Black stories. We have the intimidation from government officials. We have the ruining of careers. And, the Men in Black stories are so strange that people would have nightmares over them when they were in the same presence of them. The Men in Black acted very strange, kind of like they weren't even there, that kind of thing. And we've done a great deal, and this goes beyond the scope of Trump releasing on UFOs, but we've talked a great deal about the astral agency. And this has to be considered when you talk about the Men in Black, et cetera. But these same groups who go after dominance and remote viewing and try to make sure that they're above the Russians when it comes to, things of that nature, the psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain and all that type of thing that took place, that those battles during the Cold War to develop the best weapons, the psychic part has always been front and center. Make no mistake about it. So the more the governments ridicule that kind of thing, understand, no, it's a totally, totally different situation. So, the way that I feel about it is a lot of people have come forward, and in some cases, the careers got destroyed or they were intentionally targeted by these types of Men in Black figures.
I always think of Frankie Rowe
Yes.
as the ultimate example.
Well, she saw the memory metal, and her dad saw the dead aliens at Roswell. And they did threaten her. What did they say? They said, well, this is a big desert and we can put your body out there. No one will ever find your bones, It's a pretty big.
And she was a child.
Yeah, I think she was like 12 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Incredibly honest witness. And her dad was part of the fire brigade that would have gone, because the Roswell crash seemed like, an exploded plane or something like that. So you get the normal emergency team to come out before they realize, oh, wait, they are from here. And actually, you opened this up. I'm glad, because I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of the Roswell aspect in here and then go back to the records drop and then spin it all around to this memory metal Mondeloy Monica Reza situation. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist X series. This is X series 225. We're talking UFO files, the alert. Now, the records are out. The first files drop has happened, and well, it could have been better, but it's something. It represents a process. And the missing scientist, exotic tech bombshell, that story moving up in the background, probably the most important story in all of this, far beyond, seeing dated Apollo images from 1972 and saying that's transparency. If we get to the bottom of that, you could shake up the whole thing. But in any case, here we are, and it's better than nothing, right? So let's go back on that Roswell story for a moment. Jesse Marcel was the intelligence officer who, after getting contacted by Mac Brazel and the sheriff there in Roswell, Brazel was saying, look, something that crashed on my ranch, and it's left all these fragments. Of course, this craft is a little more touch or intact, but the idea is pretty straight ahead, which is a large craft crashed there in the New Mexico desert. And it's very interesting because if you track Brazel, you're going to learn a great deal. He was somebody who the Fosters trusted, with their lives, and he ran their ranches. He had an impeccable reputation, and the sheriff trusted him. That was the first thing he said when he came in with the debris and stuff. The sheriff was like, look, this guy has had an incredible reputation. So Mac Brazel found the wreckage on his ranch, and the way that he described it was about 1.5 miles in diameter of wreckage. Very interesting to note also that, what he did basically is he led horses and goats out there, and they wouldn't go anywhere near the regular pasture there because there was all this memory metal all over the place. The animals were like, I don't want anything to do with this alien technology. Get us out of here. I'll note this, that after the Roswell crash happened and they got Mac Brazel, they bought his silence. he lived actually quite well, and he moved to Oregon. And what's very strange, though, is while he was coming out of this whole phase of the Roswell hysteria, people wanting to know about it, and then the government shutting it down by saying it was a weather balloon, his son disappeared. And I always thought, it reminded me of the Maury Island case where, they take a member of the family in order to blackmail them. And in the weird,
It's so mob.
it is, yeah. And now what's very interesting is in the same town that his son eventually turned up in many years later, and there was a weird crime that was committed, like involving auto theft and other strangeness. But that very town, and I found this fascinating, Jesse Marcel's son, Jesse Marcel Jr., the doctor, he moved to that very same town in Montana that Mac Brazel's son moved.
Weird.
It is. It almost seems like witness relocation or protection for these people. And that is Helena, Montana. Very, very interesting town indeed. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, I got chills when you said that.
Yeah. There's a piece of that in part 3 of Roswell Reignited shows that we did last fall. But trust me, it's going to come up again here tonight. Some of the first reactions to the memory metal, I find most, this is where the thrust of the whole thing is. This is the most important aspect, because how does a human being, when they encounter this, describe it? Then, we get into all the technical things and all of the high-end physics of it and all the rest, all the way up to the case of Monica Reza having the patent for it. And so her having the patent while having been General McCasland's assistant for 5 years when he was in charge of the Roswell tech, long after the crash now, he was in charge of the tech some 4 decades later. They had learned a great deal about it all. And I think that with that weird corridor that takes place around the UFO file, that what happens is the government can't own it outright because they have this old agreement with the corporations, and there's some corporate structure still blackmailing them in the heart of this. And I think what was going on was she had figured something out about the memory metal, and that's where it was going, it was impacting the space program, all these incredible things. And so her disappearance, we're going to find out, caused a lot of perturbations in relation to the use of that quite incredible patent Mondaloy. But here's just a few of the reactions to the metal itself. And I find myself reading them more and more thoroughly to get the hint, the feeling of what this metal was all about. William Brazel Jr. Now, Mac Brazel and his son, had seen these things. And so here we have Brazel Jr. talking about it. One of the pieces looked like something in the order of tinfoil, except it wouldn't tear. You couldn't wrinkle it, lay it back down, and immediately resumed its original shape. Quite pliable, but you couldn't crease it or bend it like ordinary metal. Almost like a plastic, but definitely metallic. Dad once said that the Army had told him it was not anything made by us. Think about that quote. A little piece of it, it wasn't tinfoil, it wasn't lead foil, a piece about the size of my finger. The only reason I noticed the tinfoil, I'll call it tinfoil here just because, I picked the stuff up and put it in my chap's pocket. Might be 2 or 3 days or a week before I took it out and put it in the cigar box. I happened to notice when I put that piece of foil in the box, the damn thing just started unfolding and just flattened out. Now, things like mylar and other qualities of memory metal and things of this, that happens later, much later, 50s, and Nitanol, which I'm convinced, and other researchers are convinced that there's this crisscross with Nitanol and the memory metal. Looping that all together to Monica Raza's case with Mondaloy is something extraordinary that we did a couple of episodes ago, but I think this is crucial, the crucial understanding. I got to playing with it. I'd fold it, crease it, lay it down, unfold it. It's kind of weird. I couldn't tear it. This is what Jesse Marcel noticed. And they couldn't make a dent in it. and they couldn't burn it. And, in Jesse's words, they couldn't wham it either. They take a hammer with it. The color was in between tinfoil and lead foil, about the thickness of lead foil. Now, also interesting to note is that some people described the way that it would spill out when it was put somewhere. So it would spill out on a table and roll out like water. Other people described it as levitating, just sitting there in midair. I did an episode talking about this where we talked about one of the military men involved in the retrieval operation kept a little bit of it and couldn't help but give his son some. And the son started using it for magic tricks and things like that. And after about 6 months, his magic show got shut down hard by the military. But before that, people had all these very interesting things about this kid using this memory metal to do these incredible, elaborate tricks with. So in Roswell, people understood something very strange had gotten in there. Okay, here's a few more descriptions. This one, Sergeant Fulford, who was an aircraft mechanic, he saw some of the metal. Here's what he had to say. I picked up small silvery pieces of metallic debris, the largest of which was about 3 to 4 inches wide and 12 to 15 inches long. It looked like thin, light aluminum foil and flexed slightly when I picked it up. Once in the palm of your hand, you could wad it up into a small ball, and then when you let it go, it would immediately assume its original shape in a second or two. I thought to myself, this is neat. I'm going to keep a piece of this for myself. But they searched us thoroughly when we got back to make damn sure none of us had anything. Now, I put something on the record, which is this search continued right up till the early 2020s. It may still be continuing, this vacuuming up to make sure that that metal doesn't show up anywhere, and that the TTSA, the CIA-run corporation that had billionaire DOD figures like Chris Mellon and CIA 25-year CIA veterans like Jim Semivan suddenly showing up. I had this very funny interactions on X where, there are these guys who, come out of the blue and they read like a Reddit post and they think they're an expert on TTSA and DeLong and all this stuff. And, I've been reporting on them since it started off and they did the whole thing. So I have reports going back to 2018 on all of it and all the CIA involvement. And one of the guys cracked me up because he was like, Jim Semivan gave me the facts on, McCasland. Like, I believe Jim Semivan's account. Jim Semivan is a 25-year counterintelligence veteran, the highest directorate of the CIA. And the counterintelligence people are the best trained liars in the world because they have to be. You get them around the UFO file and promoting a UFO threat, they're going to tell you anything, So it's quite funny to me. You're going to see a lot of this. It's very low level researchy stuff. And, I call it, it's sort of that Reddit thing. Not that you can't find good things on Reddit or any forum anywhere, but there's a flimsiness to the way some of this works. You have to do the work and be potent about it. And you can't stand on anyone's particular word. You have to go in and track back the timelines yourself. You can't trust the word of a CIA agent. It's ridiculous. If you had studied the Kennedy assassination, you would realize that the CIA trained all their people to lie straight-faced about the Kennedy assassination because they didn't want to be implicated in a murder they obviously had a hand in of the 35th president of the United States.
Yeah, and they were sometimes actors because
Yes.
if you're a good actor, you're a good liar, and you can deliver something with authority. And,
David Atlee Phillips, for example.
Exactly. That's exactly what
He is an
extraordinary.
extraordinary. He came out of theater directly, and he was one of their best people. And very oddly, he wrote that novel at the end of his life, and it was all about how he had sort of selected Lee Harvey Oswald and groomed him to do this incredible thing, and how Oswald practiced the idea that he was going to assassinate Castro, and that one of the things he was going to do was bring a rifle up into a building and shoot Castro from a tall building. This is one of the things that he gave him. So, in fact, when they were doing this with Lee Harvey Oswald and placing him in this building, they might have been whispering in his ear, you're going to be this great person who takes out Castro. First, what you have to do is kind of go through the motions of what you would do if you were an assassin. You place a rifle on the 6th floor, and you sit and wait for the phone call or whatever. And so he's walking through this thing, not knowing the kind of patsy role that they've created for him. And by the time they, announce the assassination, he's like, uh-oh, something has gone wrong here, runs home. And then the situation, of course, gets worse for him. And he ends up going into the theater and getting grabbed. This is the nature of what happens. You have to understand, even Harry Truman, who set up the Central Intelligence Agency, thought it was extra constitutional. He didn't want to do it. There are all these letters between him and his wife about it, where he says, they're all putting pressure on me to do this, but it's an American Gestapo. I'm not going to do it. And he didn't for a while there, but he caved eventually. And he thought, well, what I'll do is I'll make all these Midwesterners, because the thing comes out of S&C in Manhattan. And Alan Dulles is writing the charter at Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell, that's like plugging yourself into the ultimate deep state aspect at that point in 1947. They were connected with all of international finance. So the idea of putting American blood and treasure on the line for whoever these special, wealthy clients were involved, you could move that all through a government agency. So you get very weird things with the setup of the CIA. And then you get this whole OPC aspect, Office of Policy Coordination. And the OPC is so out of hand with the tactics that they're using during the Italian elections in 1948. They're blowing up trains, they're fixing elections, they're doing all this stuff. And Truman says to the director, get them under control. I don't care what you do with this OPC, but get them to stop doing all this covert activity because they're insane. It's going to come back on us. And so they get all these people in OPC and they give them high-ranking positions in the Central Intelligence Agency. And the deep researchers like Professor Peter Dale Scott and others, they know that the OPC overtakes the regular group that's running the CIA. The regular group is feeding facts and information, international situations to the president. This group, the covert group, has their own ideas about what to do. They're the ones behind the Mossadegh overthrow. They're the ones who overthrow the dictators in Central America. They're doing their own thing. So Truman's afraid of them. Eisenhower, at first thinking, well, they'll avoid wars. We can do this. They can do this intelligence work, and, we can get some results that we want. Well, he starts to get very suspicious of their activity. And President Kennedy, when he walks into office, says, I can't believe these situations that are going on that have no executive authority at all, So we have to understand what the CIA is, and especially when we're getting this UFO thing sort of pushed at this time. Continuity of government aspect, the ability to run a UFO threat and create emergency powers. It has to be at the top of mind when we look at this. It can't be like a little alien head on Luna's Twitter or whatever. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. You have to go to the heart of the matter if you want to deal with it properly.
It's also, it's making light of a very serious topic.
Yes. Oh, no question about it. Yeah.
We're dealing with power on many levels.
Don't you know it's just the Book of Enoch? Don't you realize that? Gee, thanks, Luna.
So about the memory metal, Blazon River says, was it cold to the touch, the memory metal? Nanotech, imagine under magnification, it looked alive. The real info would be, what did it look like under a microscope? Well,
there's a lot of explanations of that too. And they vary, but one of the things that's obvious is it can withstand any heat. It's heat resistant. That's the thing that they really put it through. And that gets us to Mondeloy, because that's the great property that we get in Mondeloy. In terms of what it is to the touch, when somebody touched it, all they could say is it felt like they were touching nothing. You didn't even feel like it felt like anything. So it's that kind of like, piece of material that's just, I feel the memory metal is the animator. So it's like, this piece that's out there, and then you need this energy to make that whole thing work. And when the energy was withdrawn, you have the shell, and that's the memory metal, basically. But the idea that it can do all these things, like withstand heat and all the rest of it, would make it superior for space travel. So we have something very hardcore there. Yeah, what else you got?
Deep State, you're fired. So does DJ know if the memory metal had psychic / apotheum experiences associated with it, like the stories of people who went into Kozarev's mirror, time, dead relatives, sounds, etc.?
Yes, exactly. And it's very interesting because you get some of that in the Aztec crash case, for example. When the people go in there, they start to have almost half astral experiences. And it's very interesting because, when you talk about, and the Congress people talking about interdimensional anything is ridiculous. That is just something they figured out how to sell to Christianity, to be like, oh, these demons are coming in through interdimensional doorways. This has no basis in anything, literally. And I'm not saying that there couldn't be some type of being interdimensionally, but isn't it odd that we've spent all this time and the mystery schools have given us all these concepts about, the astral aspects and the astral plane and the etheric plane and the etheric body and the astral body. Well, those would be the places I would think you would go that we have some idea of what they are. They even have astral projection. The governments have used that. So this idea that you're dealing with something that is, it's interdimensional and therefore it's a demon and let's shoot it down. It's ridiculous. I mean, can't tell you how ridiculous this idea is, and that people like Luna and Vance push that is absurd. And Burleson's pushing it too. So they're trying to massage some way to bring in a religious aspect to this, that, those devils are coming in these spacecraft and we need your Christian money to fight it, which is ridiculous. And Christians won't fall for that either. They're much smarter. So, I feel like that's a very low level, real kind of gutter level. Yes.
Blazing River again. Then why did the ship break into millions of pieces? This is a question that has persisted.
Look, it's an incredible case. Here's the thing. Regardless of what anyone thinks it is, if somebody thought it were, a Nazi craft or a superior American craft, whatever you think it is, or, an extraterrestrial craft, which I have to say, it appears to be something that's completely outside of the normal run of human intelligence at that point. Unless you go back and look at the stories of ancient Atlantis that are in the mystery schools. They have the technology back then to do something like what we hear about later. So I shouldn't say it's outside the realm of humanity. It's just outside the realm of any kind of technical capability that we were aware of in 1947, the way that this thing flew. And it has all those principles and properties. So it comes up over and over again, could something so advanced from an advanced civilization crash? And the only thing I can say is that there isn't a law of accident that is operative with everything. It's like a law of the universe. Just like you can have these planets in this perfect orbit and then something goes awry and you have a satellite that crashes out or whatever. So yes, it could crash, even if it was totally advanced from another civilization.
Ratboy Genius says the Mechisedc device must have busted apart the memory metal.
We did a series, if you go to the Brother Sunburst episodes that we've done, you'll find a lot about the Mechisedec device. And this is something that was tracked because Tesla had it. He had developed it. And this is what the FBI was most curious about, because they wanted to know, how does this thing work and how does it pull down UFOs at a distance? So that thing was hidden, and it was hidden through a network of what they called contactees in the 50s. And there are records of those people being, basically harassed and interrogated by the FBI looking for this thing. I tracked it all the way through and to the brother of film director Brian De Palma. It gets very, very strange. The Brother Sunburst episodes sit there as a gigantic anomaly with the Mechisedec device. And by the way, in 1973, there's a researcher who was hired by General LeMay, Curtis LeMay, who was retired Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he's the guy who firebombed Japan before we dropped he firebombed Tokyo before we dropped the bomb. And it's one of the most savage things that's ever taken place in a war period. He's also somebody who was determined to get rid of President Kennedy. But he's quite fascinating because what he did was he hired somebody who was really deeply aware of the Reichian approach around UFOs. And that whole piece is rather dramatic. And he hires him for 3 months to recreate the effects of this Melchizedek device by using, a Reichian device. So, we're looking at something which was in the whole aspect of the deep state. They were searching this out. Also want to say about LeMay is he was sitting there, there's a witness to this, which is T.T. Brown's daughter. He was sitting there in the basement of Rand Corporation, the incredible defense contractor with all these secrets. And he was sitting there watching the demonstration of the acoustic fan, which basically was a device that T.T. Brown developed that defied time and space. So LeMay was very well versed in these tools. That's I think the best way to look at it. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 225, the UFO file alert, and the incredible and historic drop of these documents. And then what some people would say, well, it's, it was less than they had hoped for. And that's putting it mild because there wasn't much in this UFO files drop. However, the process is somewhat historic and has to be looked at, including the incredible dangers that follow in the track of trying to kind of trivialize this into an attacking demons in the sky situation. Of course, in the heart of all this, the missing scientists, exotic tech, and the bombshell in the heart of all that, the Mongoloid memory metal connection, the Nitanol aspect, hovering about there, touched upon in the past, this whole thing about Nitanol and the memory metal, and then brought forward in the research that we did around Mongoloid. This could really upend the entire case of it all. So we've been taking some of your questions. We're going to take your questions here in about 15 minutes before I get any more. What else?
Okay, one more from Blazing River, who's on a roll. Was the ship alive? Does the memory metal still work, or did it, quote, die? This is the reason why they're keeping this a secret. Questions like this.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I'm going to launch right into the memory metal aspect here. Okay, so we've read some of the descriptions about people who saw it and how they reacted. I'm going to read a couple more, actually, because I like some of these. June Crane, who worked at Wright-Patterson. Wright-Patterson is where so many of these people worked who disappeared later, like McCasland and others. He was in charge of the Roswell material many decades after the crash, right? So here's what June says. I took it and bent it and twisted it and laid it back down, and it went right back to the same shape. I got back to my desk, and he said, cut it. Try cutting it. I got my scissors, and I snipped at it, and there was no way I could even cut that piece of metal, and it was light as a feather. I would say that didn't weigh as much as these 2 cards. It was so light but strong, but it had no weight at all. It was sort of grayish gunmetal type of color, sort of lead colored. And he said, I just came back from New Mexico and I brought it back with me. It was practically indestructible. I couldn't even make a dent in it, nothing. I couldn't make a mark on it. I couldn't tear it up. I have yet to see anything that would have properties and look like that. The end of her reaction. But these human reactions, we could see this is something quite extraordinary going on here. There was some material that looked just like tinfoil. Now, this is Charles Schmidt, who was a resident of Roswell, just, one of these people who heard about it and saw it. A neighbor had it. There was some material that looked just like the tinfoil, but quite strong. You could ring it up in your hand and it would just straighten out. No kinks, no nothing. It would just straighten out by itself. Researcher Don Ecker discovered someone named Thomas Gonzalez who described it as airfoil. He also said he retrieved metal from the crash site as well. So you see, a lot of people did pick up bits and pieces of this, and that's where you get the vacuuming up aspect going on later. We're looking at these Spielberg movies and the Disclosure Day and all this stuff that's coming out. They're going to, I guarantee you, Spielberg knows a great deal, because of course his movie is timed to these disclosures. How tight is that? Tight indeed. So, we have to remember that the Lazar people were obviously in on this with the release of their movie. And David Grush, who's been, coming out and saying, "Oh, I want to go back to a normal life." And I don't blame him, but also he was the consultant on the movie from the Top Gun Maverick director, who's coming out with a UFO movie this summer. So, they're doing just fine for themselves, this group. They're not under any siege. I thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world when I saw Lou Elizondo out there, and they said, because he had said nothing about the missing scientist story at all because it didn't serve any of his purposes. So finally they get him. He goes, "Oh, I think some of these people like, Amy Eskridge and others could have been targeted the way that I was." Lou, you weren't targeted. You were doing the targeting. And as we know, you were stalking people who had ET encounters. That was part of your job. We found out that about you quite early. And so, the papering over of these people's lives, the falsehoods, you can't start the foundation of a truth for, humanity in the future on the falsehoods of these intelligence agents. This is why so much of the story falls by the wayside. And even when we get a release, we see these people, glomming on and saying like, "Oh, I was the one, in the background. And, because I was so brave and came out and gave this to the American people, I was under siege." This is the same guy who said that he didn't work for the government and he's a whistleblower who quit and all this stuff. And then I found out he had 4 jobs for the government. Put it on the record, offered him to come on my show to refute it. He never took it up because I'd say, "Look, first thing is, do you work for the government?" And he'd say, "Well, not directly." And I'd say, "Do you work on a contracting basis?" And he'd have to say, "Yeah, I work as a contractor for the government." Well, that's the end of believing you in relation to this because you're a counterintelligence agent working for the government. If they instruct you to give this type of, if you're in this op, what are you going to do? They already have you. The reason they have you associated with the project is because you're a good counterintelligence agent, right? So, this is why there's a fundamental thinking issue around this. And I want to say this before I go any further, which is there's a lack of depth around the UFO field and around people's thinking about it. And the intelligence agents, they play on that and they give them, little people to say, "Oh, isn't he, a hero for doing this and doing that?" And then they also give them false histories. They say, "Remember to detail this history. I came into this. Oh, I was accidentally pulled into it by Tom DeLonge." Right? Yeah, sure. So let me get this straight. So you have this burnout ex-musician, and he is going to get a CIA agent involved in the UFO project. Really? You really think I'm going to believe that? No, I don't believe it in a million years. But I do believe that you used DeLonge as a bobo for your UFO threat operation. You see how that works? So it's a very different kind of understanding. So I know about that, not because I'm a great genius, but because I've studied how intelligence groups work. And then I've studied the UFO file and see all the lies that are involved there. If you put the two together, it's a devastating combination. We've showed that over and over again on this program. Here's the thing. We can have that type of depth to this conversation, or we can have this flimsy, alien head in Burchett's Twitter feed. It depends. What do you want? Do you want CIA alien head disclosure, or do you want to get somewhere with this stuff? So once you make up your mind that you want to do something potent, the whole thing bifurcates because there's all this junk over here that anybody's going to buy. But if you look at it, go study the story now of Lou Elizondo from 5 years ago. It totally falls apart. The whole thing, everyone knows it's a lie. But we called it out as a lie at the time. And then the UFO researcher said, "Oh, how could you do that with this whole brave operation for disclosure? It's historic. What's wrong with you?" Well, I prefer to have things that are truthful and historic. Is that so bad? That's the question. So this is what I think we need the emphasis on. We have to use our brains and think. And, we can't have flimsy Reddit research doing the thinking for us. You got to go much, much deeper. You have to sit down with the books. You have to sit down, watch the videos, study the people, study their connections. then you get a much better feel for it. As a matter of fact, most of the people I encounter online, I think that they have the ability to think of these things. The only problem is they haven't taken the time to read the crucial information. You know, they haven't taken the time to try to study it. And then they would weigh out the balances and see, whenever you get around intelligence people, you're going to deal with some function of lying, because that's the nature of the job, you know? And it's not even to say, well, all intelligence people are bad, but when they get put in a situation of national security, they know how to flip the switch and go into counterintelligence mode. And if they're running an op, you know, as we've seen the op, we've described the op for years and years, the UFO file threat op, if they're running that operation, they'll throw anything out there. You know, remember the guy who was in love with the egg? He said he felt loving vibes coming from that egg. Jake. Well, you know, whatever they were trying there, you know, they were lobbing them through News Nation. They were lobbing them through Rogan or whatever. They were trying to see, can we get this thing to catch? Which one is going to catch it? And along the way, you get some really weird stuff. Including the fact, I have to mention this, Ben Swan interviewed, are you ready? The Titan of UFO disclosure, Corey Goode, the secret space commander himself. Now, what kind of research has somebody like Ben Swan, who knows a great deal about deep state stuff and all the rest of it, how did he end up with a guest like Corey Goode? You see, you got to be careful when you do this. And I have to say this because since I mentioned Goode, but some people have asked me if I thought the situation with David Wilcox passing, you know, was suspicious or not, because he killed himself, as we know. And the timing on it all was very strange. The only thing I can tell you is the situation is quite tragic, and the timing I thought was very strange. But, you know, it doesn't matter when you think of the work that the person was doing or whatever. Of course, it's a sad and tragic thing when somebody does that, especially somebody who is kind of, you know, a light market fluff version of this stuff, and, you know, had associated himself with people like Goode, who really were just the opposite, you know. And so I didn't like any of that stuff. And obviously I was on the opposite side of it. But, you know, is it sad when a guy like that takes his own life? And is it suspicious is another question. You'd have to really look at the law enforcement information around that. And, you know, it could very well be that he did take his own life. But whatever it is, certainly it's a sad ending for anybody doing, you know, the kind of thing that he was doing. So I guess that's the best way I could answer that. No, you know, I didn't think that any of the stuff that he was involved in, you know, I didn't believe in those tracks. I thought it was all manipulated work. But you know, you get a person, you have to understand this when you deal with anything in the media, especially around alternative media. There's a performative aspect to it, and the person gets out there and people come to know them as a figure, and, you know, they're part of a show or a book or whatever it is. So there are things that go on in a person's life that, you know, have pressures and all the rest of it. In terms of, a lot of people ask me if I thought it was suspicious, like I said, and I don't have enough. I mean, I've looked at it a little bit. I don't have enough details, but I think that just the idea of it is kind of strange, shall we say. So, but, you know, in a person's life, there's no way I can't measure myself or get into a guy's head like that. But absolutely, do I think it's a sad, tragic thing? There's no question about it. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Yeah. I mean, we watched a lot of the videos, you know, his friends talking about David's last days, and
Yeah.
or the weeks
Oh,
leading.
yeah.
And, you know, I mean, when you're if you need to talk to your friends on the phone for 12 hours a day, you know, it's a sign right there that you are hanging on by a
Yeah.
thread.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what, I mean, at least my interpretation is this, you know, people could see it coming.
Yeah, I think he was in trouble. He could have been a very manipulated person. And we know some of the people that were around him were big time manipulators. And so that whole thing started, and the whole thinking about all this because of the weird Ben Swan strangeness. I mean, I can't. What kind of a world would you imagine? You know, it's like imagining Ron Paul sitting down with a mass criminal or something. It's very odd, you know. But this is the nature of the world we're in right now. Okay, so I think we've done a pretty good job describing people's reactions in that original thing around the memory metal and all the rest of it. Speaking of tragedies, the story of the missing scientist, you know, this is another thing that I want to point out to people, which is you're dealing with a person's life, and you know, there were a lot of publications who jumped on the story and sensationalized it. But it didn't need any sensationalizing because it was such an incredible, it's an off the charts story. It's unprecedented in many ways. But there were also these groups like, you know, Vanity Fair and others who were pushing back and saying, oh, the families don't want you to investigate, you know, and how inconsiderate it is of you to look at the government and what they were doing with these scientists. Look, it's actually not true. In the case of Monica Reza, I'll even read some of this tonight. They are highly, highly suspicious of the official version. And they are incredibly ticked off that the FBI is not investigating her death. So, if anything, by bringing light to the subject of the missing scientist, what we're doing actually is helping the family to see whatever happened. And our intention in doing it is certainly not for any sensationalism at all. It's to get to the bottom of a crime, because that type of pattern, we're very familiar with it and we've seen it, whether it was the holistic doctors in the 2017, 2018 period, and that incredible takedown of a series of high-level holistic doctors. You have to know those patterns if you work in any kind of dark journalism, and you have to be willing to investigate those types of things. And you'll always do it with the idea of the person. You know, it's very interesting to me because, you know, very often with the dismissive tone that the Atlantic had, for example, when it came to Melissa Casillas, for example, because she worked in a very, you know, with a top security clearance, but she was an administrative assistant, which meant she passed classified information back and forth between parties, which is a very important position. And they were trying to belittle all that, you know, by saying, oh, right, you know, sure, why would they get rid of her? Why would they bump her off? She's just an administrative assistant. You know, you can see the arrogance in the minds of these people. But what you have to know is for every case of a person who goes missing under any condition, but particularly where the government and security processes are in mind, or even for malicious groups inside of that system who don't want certain things to come out, you know, it's definitely a service to investigate. Make no mistake about it, and do not fall for the phony aspect. As long as the you know, investigation is doing it in a respectful way to get to the point, then it's absolutely crucial. It's a function of investigative journalism that is, you know, sacrosanct in my opinion. Okay. Let's see if I can pull some threads together here. This is a story from 2017 in a space publication. What is Mondaloy? Why should you care? And you can see Monica Reza there. Now, here she is. This is 8 years before her disappearance. She's brought it forward. She's been triumphant. She's actually made America a player in the space race again. It's funny that SpaceX and all these other things come up. But as a result of her work, Mondaloy, which she developed, is a family of burn-resistant, high tensile strength nickel-based superalloys. Two metallurgists at Rockwell International. Remember, if you study the dark journalist work, Rockwell International is very important because the aerospace connection there goes all the way back to the fact that their original CEO, William Rockwell, was fascinated by Atlantis and was the person who bought all this property off Bimini because he was searching for ruins off of Atlantis, okay? Off of Bimini for Atlantis, based on the Casey readings. And I got the letter from the Association for Research and Enlightenment it was actually very interesting because it was to Edgar Casey's son, and it was from the son. It was Trig Adams who wrote it, the pilot I've talked about on this show and discussed before. But he was the son of Margaret Sanders, who was the daughter of Colonel Sanders. And so there was this whole group called Mars, which explored the possibility and archaeological ruins were right there in the Bahamas of Atlantis based on the Casey readings. Well, all that is right there. When you say Rockwell International, boom, you're right in the heart of it. But the other thing that Rockwell International did, was a main player in, was the Apollo missions, how we got to the moon in the first place. Every existing alloy before this, American alloy, burned like paper in high pressure gaseous oxygen that cycle produces. Russia had the design, America did not. And so on this goes. Mondeloi was the American answer. It would let the United States build its own oxygen-rich staged combustion engine and stop handing cash to Moscow every time a spy satellite needed a ride. Exactly. That is the textbook answer. Okay, so we understand that what Monica Reza had done with her counterpart, who had passed away from cancer, this other woman scientist, was create something phenomenal. But what was the environment she was in when she had created this patent? She was in the environment under General McCasland. She was in that Roswell Wright-Patterson environment. She had developed this in that environment. Part of the tranche from the Roswell crash went directly, as we know, to Wright-Patterson. It was also investigated by Battelle, which Wright-Patterson sent it out because they needed specialists to look at it. And we've produced some of those records. And it's very interesting because I believe that the group working as a team that we saw disappeared there, McCasland, Monica Reza, and Melissa Katsios, you got rid of the team. The team is gone. Therefore, you don't have to worry about them when you're dealing with this. And as I said, you know, for the family, they've got this, Monica Reza's family, quote, it doesn't make sense. It's not adding up for them. And it also doesn't make sense for them that the FBI is not investigating them. Insulting, in fact. So there's a number of aspects about NASA and this metal and all the rest of it. But what I want to put across here is that Mondeloi was such an innovation. Now, the other innovation of its kind, which also is associated with this memory metal, in my opinion, and I put this across from the very start with this, that the people who had investigated the idea that Nitanol actually had its basis as this Roswell memory metal got injected into it, because Nitanol, when it was first starting out, wasn't going anywhere. If you look at the papers and all the rest of it, Roswell crash happens. They do some things in the background. The records disappear around Nitanol for a couple of years there. Battelle, which is working on the Roswell crash, they don't keep records, and they say, well, we were a nonprofit. We're not required to, which was ridiculous. And there were a whole series of cases, and there was one guy named Tony Brigaglia, and I put forward his article from 2009 saying the memory metal is missing. I think it's a real innovation, his work around this, and I recommend his different thing. He's worked on that question of Nitanol for years. But now if we can take that up a notch from the memory metal becoming Nitanol to the memory metal becoming Mondeloi, we're going to be home free, understanding the reasons why these scientists disappeared in the first place. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Deep, deep, deep tonight into X Series 225, the UFO file alert, missing scientists, exotic tech bombshell. This is the exotic tech aspect. We're going to take your questions here shortly. We're moving it. Say we'll take them in about 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. How's that, correct? What do you got?
Rapoy Genius says, evidently, Mondeloi is also optimized for 3D printing.
Yes. Yeah, it came up. It's really interesting. I have an episode on 3D printing coming up in relation to space and the moon, which might, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but it might answer your question pretty well. I'm going to read a little bit about Nitanol so that we get a handle on why it even comes up in relation to this. And it's funny because when you read the original descriptions of it, they have this thing like, oh, there's some ridiculous conspiracy comparing it to the Roswell medal. Ha, 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 Well, there's a good reason for that, and I'm going to show you why. So what we have is this character named Dr. Bueller, and he comes out of the blue with this version of Nitanol that we're talking about here, which becomes supercalifragilistic in no time. And here's some weird things about it in general. And again, I'm going to recommend somebody named Anthony Brigaglia, who went deep into figuring out how Roswell might be associated with the memory metal. The memory metal might be associated with Nitanol. One of the problems immediately evident with the official history of Nitanol is the exact year offered for its discovery. You simply Google the word Nitanol with any of the following years, 1958, 1959, 1960, 1961, or 62, or 63. Search results will show links to sites that give each of these years as the year of discovery. For Nitanol, even Nitanol's official co-inventors, Bueller and Wang, have offered different years of discovery when at the Naval Lab. Scientific journals and articles found in the popular press gave different years. When reached by this author and asked what was the exact year he co-invented the material, Wang gave a strange laugh and admitted that he wasn't exactly sure. Would have to look it up. That's a little strange, yeah. So the idea basically is, did the Roswell memory metal get seeded into corporations, and then was it redeveloped and piggybacked on top of this so that they could say normally, oh, hey, we were working on this metal, and look, we have this super incredible thing now. Instead of, we recovered this UFO, and wow, it has all these amazing properties. So this has to be kind of looked at on a deeper level. Now, here's the man himself, Dr. Bueller, who's in the heart of all this controversy. And he did this amazing thing, which is he developed Nitanol, which became not only an incredible medical life-saving device, but became key to our space program. This guy was working deep programs, but he was also the front man with Wang, who also has a couple of interesting connections. I'll leave Wang out of this discussion, but boy, he's interesting. So Brigaglia, in talking about his own articles about Battelle, he said prior articles showed the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base contracted Battelle Memorial Institute in the months immediately following the Roswell crash. And I follow that thread because a lot of people have put this on the record that the Wright-Patterson Roswell material went to Battelle. And to conduct studies on memory metal based on a nickel titanium alloy, similar material that could remember its original shape when crumpled or deformed. And we remember all of those memory metal descriptions. So we're getting somewhere deep now with this. The base that contracted Battelle, Wright-Patterson, was the very base to which the Roswell debris was flown to. Evidence for the Roswell-Battelle connection was drawn from footnotes that were located within military studies in a Battelle report on the memory metal conducted by the Institute for Wright-Patterson in the late 1940s. So it's there. The paper trail is there. They obfuscated some of it by getting rid of the reports of how Nitanol was produced, and then offering years later this very strange explanation for it. So now I want to get into a little bit of what it does, and this is the NASA connection part of it. One of the ultimate goals of the work, and this is now Brigaglia talking about moving the metal to NASA and into space. One of the ultimate goals of the work of the memory metal was to return it to outer space. It came from a spacecraft at Roswell, and it would ultimately be used for this very purpose by us through NASA. This is confirmed by Nitanol's official co-inventor, William Bueller, tellingly states in an oral history that after his discovery, it was NASA that independently retained Battelle to conduct further characterization studies on Nitanol. Bueller reveals two things as an elderly man recollecting his past. Battelle was still involved in directing the study of the material in the 1960s, and that it was NASA that was pulling the strings about the direction of research on the material. So this is, we've got the connections there that they were applying it to the space program and getting phenomenal things. Yes, when they applied it for medical purposes or for devices and things like that, they were getting really, great results, commercial results that they could use and move into industry. But the space thing was particularly important for them. And keep that in mind when we get to Monica Reza here as well. All right, now moving out of Bergelia's stuff and just into the general history for Nitanol, we've got this. Dr. Bueller discovered the shape memory properties of Nitanol while working at the Naval Ordnance Laboratories. This is a regular background on Nitanol that you can find in Encyclopedia Britannica. It's important to note that Nitanol was not the first shape memory alloy discovered. Researchers had been playing around with gold cadmium since 1939, but the shape memory effect was minimal and the material was extremely expensive. Nitanol was discovered by a brilliant young scientist named William J. Bueller. Bueller was a metallurgist at Naval Ordnance Labs. Now, just like the Air Force labs become the center of the UFO activity around Roswell and McCasland and all those people who go disappearing, they all come out of AFRL. This is the early version, and it's the naval version. Same labs, same stuff that they're working on. And Bueller comes out of that whole thing, the Naval Ordnance Lab. Bueller described this project as hoping something would pop up, and that he didn't expect the results that he got, not in the way that anyone would have expected. Bueller was looking at alloys in two solid states as possible materials for a nose cone for the Polaris missile that was capable of withstanding the heat of reentry into Earth's atmosphere. This is the key to what happened with Mondaloy and Monica Reza, which is her strain of this nickel alloy became incredibly heat resistant. Go back again in your mind to the intelligence officer, Jesse Marcel, saying, we tried everything. When we brought it back to the base, we couldn't burn it. We tried high heats and everything else. It was completely resistant. This is highly significant. So, it goes along from there, and basically what takes place is they start to realize, oh, this thing solves all the questions around space, and that this Nitanol can be used for various development of spacecraft. It takes care of the heat problem, and the Nitanol is basically, a derivative of the memory metal, but it has that nice history in the background, the fake deep state history of the development, because that was just the podunk thing that they were working on in the beginning before they infused it with this X-Tech. So it goes along a little bit. Let's see if there's something else here. In 1959, the shape memory aspect of Nitanol was discovered, and it was put in a lab meeting in 1961. That's where they first have it on record. Now, here's the memory aspect. So it's on record starting in 1961. They discovered it in 1947. And Bueller had been confirming tests to determine the fatigue life of Nitanol by bending a strip into an accordion-like shape over and over again. His project was brought under review, and his technicians were demonstrating the fatigue properties for senior officials. During this presentation, one of the officials present heated the Nitanol with a lighter, at which point it rapidly straightened out, just like the memory metal and the Jesse Marcel story. This, of course, sent ripples throughout the scientific community. The material could now take low-grade heat and generate mechanical energy. Numerous scientists began experimenting with how to build energies from Nitanol that would take low-grade energy and transform it into very high-grade energy, and so on. This is how the whole thing became remarkable. And they actually created a conference for this thing called the Nitanol Heat Engine Conference, going into how this thing basically was transforming anything that we knew about space and the technology. Now, I read you these details because I want you to understand the innovation around Reza's development. And then I want you to understand that she's the understudy of McCasland. They work on this thing together. She makes the patent, and they have the patent. They're using the patent for all their spacecraft. We've gotten off the Russian dependence, and then something is amiss there with the fact that she owns the patent, or some of the releases that are going to come out around the UFO file, and then the team disappears. That's where you get some of these aspects of the missing scientists. We need to keep in mind the function of why. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep into the misty wood of the Roswell crash here tonight. X Series 225, the UFO file alert, the amazing drop of promised files by the Trump administration, which turned out to be, less than satisfying on a number of levels, and included a lot of things that we'd already seen before, certainly, but has now pushed us into this different realm, shall we say. The age of the UFO threat is now going online straight up. We're going to be taking your questions here in about 5 minutes. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
DAJCNJZ says, DJ, was the skin of the beings made of that Nitanol too? I mean, the beings with the skin suits? Nana says, responds, oh, those shiny silver suits they purportedly wear? And Synergy Conscious says, evidently Mondaloy is the metal the Mandalorian armor is made of. The entire series highlights the power of the metal of the Mandalorian. Is this a link/message to those in the know?
Interesting. Well, that is fascinating. Well, let's go to the bodies. Here's something interesting that's on record, which doesn't require, believing a legend or a story. But so we have the physicist Sar Barker going on the record in relation to this. And he said, in the 1980s now, he said, yeah, I was on these UFO redevelopment teams. I don't know why none of this ever came out. I still don't understand why it didn't. But yes, we examined the craft, we redeveloped the materials, we did all that. And when it came to the bodies, we found that, the conclusions that we came to is somebody had constructed them, and that basically they had constructed them basically like an insect. And it's interesting because I remember the whole story about, people may remember when I met Charlie Foltz on the street by accident when I was like 20 years old, something like that. And, he was talking to his friend about something, and we got into a conversation about UFOs. And he started to tell me about what happened to him being abducted. And his two friends there, who were both mass art teachers, the way they described the alien was an insect with spandex on, as you recall. So I think that insect thing is interesting. But the idea, if they are sort of constructed androids, somebody is doing that construction with them. And the fact that they had assumed, well, it's weird. We come across these dead aliens, basically, they're kind of built like, insects. And they figured out their conclusion, according to Sar Barker, was that they needed that in order to absorb the incredible G-forces and things that would take place in a speed environment. So I read you the background on the Nitanol. There's more to go on that, but what I want you to keep in mind now is this aspect around Mondaloy, because this is what the whole thing graduated into. And if we understand the memory metal, the Nitanol story, the people who've cracked the code back there of Nitanol suddenly getting an incredible boost after Battelle takes it over after the Roswell crash, it's a huge hint in history. And the Monica Reza McCasland story with its Roswell tie-in is the completion of that hint. So now we understand there's a whole technological aspect related to this. But here's what's interesting. That's just the memory metal. You think about all the unusual apotheme effects related to the UFO file, and you think about the incredible industry around that technology and how these people become fascinated with it. And, what is the character in Lord of the Rings who becomes fascinated with the precious and all that? Well, he is looking out at it, and he, his whole being is transformed by Gollum, and he becomes just completely transfixed by it. That's what's going on when you get around the UFO technology. And this is the nature of the problem. Yes.
Scarmouge, Trump called for a renewal of the world's fairs, a new run at technology disclosure.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Well, I think, occasionally he just has a good idea. That's a pretty good idea. And, but a lot of things were revealed in those. And it's also interesting to note that some of the earliest innovations of Nikola Tesla, including lighting up the entire World's Fair, I think it's 1893, are the first demonstrations of what you could do with alternating current. And it is an amazing innovation for humanity.
If they're ready to roll out a lot of suppressed technology, a World's Fair would be an incredible opportunity to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I also think that, you see, the interesting thing is that part of the problem here is the levels and layers of deception. The groups that hold the information and the wall of secrecy that they've built. So their whole thing is deception. You can't get honest answers out of them. This is the nature of the problem. They use the truth as a lever for holding lies in place as well. So what's very important, and it was funny because I was listening to an interview with Sting, of all people. And of course, Sting is an incredible musician and songwriter, but he was talking about the menace of AI, and that what he saw happening was people getting together in communities and keeping that kind of community structure and the one-to-one structure as the only way to fight off the influence of artificial intelligence. And I thought that was an incredible insight on his part. And so it jibes somewhat. Okay. Rolling Stone magazine. Are you ready for this? Rolling Stone magazine covers the missing scientists and my research into it. This is something else. But again, the tone, note the tone is quite interesting. I want to put this on the record because there's a couple of things in that article I'm going to spotlight. That's the article. It's from May 3rd, and it's got all the information about the missing scientist research that we put out that got picked up, and then the different permutations of the whole thing. So here's what they have to say. At least 11 U.S. scientists linked to U.S. nuclear and space research programs have died or vanished in recent years, prompting a federal investigation into a situation President Trump called pretty serious stuff. They've gotten him kind of off it, though. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? House Oversight Committee announced that it would look into the deaths and disappearances after committee chairman James Comer warned something sinister could be happening. Now, you could have easily taken this whole idea of a congressional committee that Luna and Burchett talked about. Hey, we can get all this out. And what did they do? Did they put together something about the UFO file with the missing scientists? They could have exploded everything with the timing. No, they said, we're going to do an MK Ultra committee on May 13th. Hey, listen, I think an MK Ultra committee is a long overdue thing they could have done fantastic things with. Could it have waited so they could have done the missing scientist thing while the trail was still kind of warm? Like we've only lost McCasland, for example, since February 27th. If you wait and wait and wait, that thing is just going to go colder and colder and colder. CNN reported that the FBI is leading efforts to find connections between the missing and deceased scientists and is working with the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense. Thank you. That's what it's actually called. NASA posted on X that the agency is coordinating and cooperating with the relevant agencies in relation to the missing scientists. Who are the scientists who have died and disappeared? Questions about a possible sinister connection between the 11 deaths and disappearances began to emerge after William Neal McCasland, 68-year-old former U.S. Air Force Major General, was reported missing from his Albuquerque home by his wife February 27th, 2026. McCasland left his prescription glasses, phone, and electronics behind. He's thought to have taken his .38 caliber revolver with him. 2 months later, officials still can't say where he went. I don't think there's any proof he took the gun with him, by the way, but leaving the devices at home, we've gone through the pattern. I've seen now 1 million TikTok videos trying to repeat the information we put out there. Here's what I want to make very specific. there's a protocol that's involved with this. These people are being instructed to operate the protocol, which is to make sure that you're not trackable. And we know in one of the cases, we have Jason Thomas up here, the employee from Novartis, who was a high-level scientist inside the organization, leaving his smartwatch in his mailbox. If that's not some kind of a signal of a pattern going on in relation to the devices of these people, I don't know what is. McCasland was the one-time commander of Wright-Patterson Base, central to the Roswell incident, connection to UFO lore and classified space weapons program. It fanned the flames of speculation sparked by a YouTuber named Daniel Liszt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when he posted a video theorizing that a Portuguese physicist was assassinated because of his work on advanced fusion research. Nuno Loureiro, a renowned nuclear science professor, was shot and killed at his Massachusetts Brookline home. He was recently named the MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center. And so they dive into some of the aspects there. Here's the deal. When you get to Loureiro, remember what we put on board with it. He was working on a neutron star merger technology that puts him, along with the plasma research, into that UFO field. Could be in a backdoor fashion. They didn't say here's a UAP program, but the research is related. So once you understand that, these things start to jibe together, just like Carl Gromeyer, who was the Caltech professor, high-level clearance. He gets shot very mysteriously in his home, in the middle of nowhere, California. And the story around it's very, very strange. And the person who did it isn't somebody who would even be around there. He's somebody who, did carjackings and things in Los Angeles. What was he doing in the middle of nowhere? And, them saying, oh, it was a carjacking gone wrong. Really? So we have all kinds of strange things there. It's funny. I was reading a follow-up story where that guy goes into court and, the accused killer of Carl Gromeyer, and he is making all these weird faces. You want to talk about MK Ultra? Man, put this guy right in the heart of the committee because he is making the weirdest faces and gestures during the whole thing, just off the charts. Yes. What do you got?
David Termina says, DJ, if you track the official story of Mondaloy, it reads that they didn't need it after all because Blue Origin developed their own version of an engine that, quote, didn't need the heat resistance, unquote. The man who officially decided that Reza's Mondaloy engine was unnecessary now runs the Blue program that is supposed to catch near-Earth asteroids and rogue satellites. That's how the guy I'm referring to calls it just Blue instead of Blue Origin, Tori Bruno.
Right. Now, remember Blue, and Termina is right. He tapped into a thing here, which is very interesting because there's something that takes place with Mondaloy that is very interesting after Monica Reza disappears, which is they say there are production issues with it now because we don't know how she did the secret sauce with Mondaloy. So therefore, we're going to switch to this other thing. And there's a great intrigue there involving aerospace companies and Blue Origin. And in the heart of Blue Origin's story is the Neo Hunter piece that Bezos is putting out there, which is to take down city-threatening asteroids, and so many of the fireball things that we were seeing over the past month. Definitely, it's very interesting that Bezos has dedicated himself now to being the asteroid killer with this Neowise Hunter. And I think that there might even be something that question is pointing out that I printed out here. But basically, the upshot is, oh, yeah, I did. I printed it out. This is the thing, and you can let me know if this is what you put up there. But I think this is the one. It says it's the ULA Alliance, United Launch Alliance, which includes a lot of the major heavies. They get together to do these launches. So major, like Boeing and others. And United Launch Alliance sought to distance itself Wednesday from the remarks of its vice president of engineering that he made on Tuesday, implying the Denver-based rocket builder has all but decided to use Blue Origin's BE-4 engine instead of Aerojet Rocketdyne's ARI to power its next generation launcher. This is very important because something took place there, some kind of switch took place in the background around who they were going to use. And remember, it was Monica Reza who was working for Rocketdyne. And Aerojet Rocketdyne, it's very interesting. The history goes all the way back to Parsons and Aerojet back there in the 1940s. We did that whole episode last week on Parsons in relation to this. But there's something really odd about the timing there that takes place, and then them saying, well, we're not really sure we can use, the Mondaloy in relation to this because there's a production issue arising out of the fact that our friend is no longer around here to supervise the process. So, her co-partner who developed the entire thing, she died of breast cancer. And then, so there's nobody else apparently who knows the process. And when Monica disappears, they can't do it anymore. It seems highly unlikely, and yet it's very strange. If it was that compartmentalized, if that's true, it would give a very, very heavy motivation for removing her. So I think there's a gigantic aerospace intrigue moving around in the background. And there's more to tell and more to say, but we're going to integrate it with the last round of questions by turning it over to you, Miss Olivia.
Okay, back to David Tormina. And now they're all set to colonize the moon with nuclear rockets with the company that now owns Reza's work, AE Industrial Partners.
Yeah, there was something very interesting, which is the patent for Reza had changed hands over the past, I think it was 11 or 12 years, into 22 different hands. So there's something, I believe, the nature of the corridor of the X-Tech being developed gives it this kind of thing where you can't nail it down in any particular government agency. And therefore, if she has a private patent on this, you can move it through the system in this unusual way. And so there's all sorts of weird trails and footprints around her incredible patent based on the Roswell material. And there's some kind of intrigue going on there now, which her disappearance basically, it created the circumstance that allowed for this to happen. So it's highly unusual, and it sets off all sorts of alarm bells when thinking about her disappearance and the McCasland team's the disappearance in a very short period of time. The entire team is gone in less than a year, right? It was basically she and Monica and Melissa disappeared in June 2025, and then he disappears in February of 2026. We have that, about 7-month corridor there. They're gone. The team's gone. That's it. Yes.
Give me 1 second. Okay.
While you're figuring it out, I want to remind everyone you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 225, of course, the UFO file alert and all the incredible files that came out today. We covered, it in the opening. We'll do more coverage on that, but I will say, let's say the release was incredibly wanting for something dramatic, and they seem to be overemphasizing the Apollo aspect. But the missing scientist exotic tech bombshell is in the heart of what we're getting at tonight with the memory metal and the Roswell connection to Monica Reza's work and the whole McCasland Roswell work. So we've been stressing those things as the core, as the heart of the missing scientist piece. There's more to it, but you can see that piece is central and it's already commercialized. So we have, something that a traditional law enforcement investigation could get after with those facts. We put them on the record. So, the fact that the FBI is staying away from the Monica Reza case, I think is strange. And that comes directly from the family now. So it's not just a rumor. The quote is, Reza's relatives say neither the FBI nor the White House has contacted them. It's weird.
Definitely.
That's just a couple of days ago. I mean, we've been talking about it since January, right? So, well, we've been talking about Loureiro since January and McCasland since February. And then McCasland was the connection with her because she was his assistant for 5 years. So let's say, we brought her up in March and then, all these reports have her in there. Why wouldn't the FBI have contacted the family? Very, very strange. Yeah. What do you got?
Team 4062 says the reason the scientists are being popped is because of time travel technologies, not ETs. Mike Rotunda says it's plasma crafts or entity. That's what a lot of them are. That's why they change shape. That's why they go into water with no splash or go from Earth's atmosphere so easily. It's a plasma being. What do you have to say about any of those?
Well, that thing about plasma beings is interesting because a lot of people diving in from different angles have taken a look at it scientifically, but also taken a look at it from a more, shall we say, like etheric point of view. And obviously, we're opening up to the idea around plasma and how it's a generative living force. So yeah, in terms of time travel, so many things are up in the air there. So we'd have to really define what you're talking about in relation to time travel. I think there are aspects indicated in the work of T.T. Brown where he did experiments dealing with it. And according to what his daughter told me was that he was convinced. And he asked actually her boyfriend of the time, who was his lab assistant, what would you do, basically? And well, the first thing he asked him was, do you think it's possible? And the assistant said, yeah, and T.T. Brown said, you're right. You're on the right track, young man. And he said, what would you do? And he said, well, I'd go back in time and save my sister. Apparently his sister had drowned in a tragic incident when when she was like 5 or 6 or something like that. And it's very interesting because T.T. Brown looked at him and said, there are things set in place that wouldn't allow you to do that. So there's something about time travel to understand there. We talk about the grandfather complex and all the rest of it. You're limited in what you can do in terms of changing history, but certainly going back and re-experiencing it, that could be something that he was talking about.
Do you think that they have the Star Trek transporter technology?
Well, there have been transmutation of matter devices developed and tested, and they've tried to move things from here to there. So we know they've tried it
Publicly, right? But you always say the secret tech is 50 years.
Oh, no
ahead
question.
of what we get to see.
Oh, I think there's an invisibility. I do.
We know they have invisibility.
Yes.
I'm really starting to think, especially with Reza, that
they transported her out.
The only explanation that makes sense to me, although it's other people could say it's ludicrous, is that they've figured it out and they have this technology.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was looking at the various reports around people updating what the nature of the search right after it happened. And here's a couple of things that came directly out of the earliest reports. They were talking about, they were looking for the actual coordinates of where her hat was found, because her hat was found. And they do list the coordinates. They have here when the hat was found, her hat was found, and they give the coordinates, and then they say it looked like she missed a hard right turn on the trail. Kudos to the team that followed the draw and found her beanie. I've seen several similar cases up here on Mount Hood. So there was a lot of independent activity around this, and I will say there was an official search, and they didn't find anything related to, basically the trail stopped at the hat, which was within about 6 feet of where she was. So yeah, what do you got?
David says the transporter just can't handle hats. But Netta says this kind of explains those 1950s suits on the Men in Black. But the idea that the Men in Black can zap in and zap out, that they've had the technology since they've been showing up, right? That story of Dan Aykroyd shares
Oh, no question.
about how they were just gone.
Well, I mean, if you were good at astral projection, you could astral project yourself into a place and disappear. Go back to the early stories of Ledbetter and people like that, and you'll see it happens all the time. Emma Britton, when she talks about it, it literally, these people astral travel and project themselves on a regular basis. They're associated with the early Theosophical Society.
Why would you need a car?
That might just be part of your kind of outfitting of the situation. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Might make you look more normal in a way. Well, I guess if it's a 40s car in the case of the Men in Black. I think, look, I believe Dan Aykroyd 100%. I'm going to read this in terms of Monica Raza's disappearance to put it on the record. The family member said investigators have ruled out a fatal wildlife encounter with a mountain lion, etc., noting the absence of any clothing remnants, backpack, or biological evidence associated with a mountain lion or bear attack. There was nothing, the source later said, described the lack of physical indicators that might suggest any kind of animal-related incident. The timeline of Reza's final known movements has also come into sharper focus. Reza hiked up the summit with a male companion from her yoga group, while a second female companion only went about halfway before stopping and doing some yoga as the climb was difficult. The female eventually went back to her car before later seeing the male companion, who then told her Reza was missing. Widely circulated photograph at the top of the mountain is believed to be the last confirmed image of her. The ascent typically takes about 2 hours. And I have that photo. I'll show it here as we go along. But her disappearance was so sudden. This is the thing that comes back again and again. And it was in a situation where, you know, you're hiking with a couple other people, and it's not the sort of thing where you wander off into the woods and nobody sees you again. You're with a group, small group, and then you're gone. You know, this is what we need to realize. It has the fingerprints of an intelligence kidnapping. You know, we're talking about very high-end professionals here. Yes.
Lazen River says, maybe Star Trek is the wrong way to look at it. Maybe portals is the correct way to look at transporting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think there's all sorts of portal activity that they've studied Native Americans over. As a matter of fact, I think the founding of the Cosmos Club, and its very strange and unusual founder that we've done episodes on, and the fact that he basically, you know, is the guy who creates UFO Bilderberg. But he's somebody who, when he was in the Civil War, you know, is standing there, he's stationed at Cape Girardeau for years. And he lives in Cape Girardeau for a decade. So, you know, the fact that the first major UFO crash happens in 1941, Cape Girardeau, no, the Cosmos Club is an aspect there. And if you go into the history of the founder of the Cosmos Club, what you're going to find is he spent all this time with Wovoka and the Paiutes in Nevada. Well, look, Wovoka, one of the things he's quite famous for is being a key figure in the ghost dance craze of the 1880s, where they would paint on a certain figure on a shirt and do the ghost dance, and then they would be invulnerable to these bullets. And it created this incredible mystical trend there. But Wovoka was known to also have all these incredible mystical qualities, but he seems like also a trickster type figure. And he would eventually take on the name Jake Wilson. And it's very interesting. If you go back into the Black Elk book, you're going to see a lot of people who were in the Native American tribes who had learned about, you know, Christianity and Jesus Christ. They thought Wovoka was Christ. So there's something remarkable about the abilities that the Paiutes had, and you have this figure coming into the heart of it all. And he's basically a guy who lost an arm, the founder of the Cosmos Club. And he goes and he does these amazing, searches of the Grand Canyon and all these things, and suddenly Washington and everyone is interested in him, and they're promoting him and they're funding him and doing these incredible things. And it's always been my impression that the Cosmos Club founder, in association with the Paiutes, was introduced to an older version of this technology, a crash saucer, or something of that nature. So, there's a whole, there's a pretty major story to unfold there. And, but make no mistake, it is, you're looking at an incredible 19th century version of the setup for the UFO file. Yes, everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Okay, it's X Series 225, UFO file alert and the missing scientists, exotic technology. We're taking your questions here, and we're going to go about another 15 minutes with you here as well. Yes.
Lazen River. Unless or until we're told that there is at least one alien race that we know about, creating all the UFOs ever documented is moot.
Well, I agree with you in a sense that just throwing a bunch of lights at us in films and video, it's nice. We've had them. We've seen them. And they're like, look, but they're taken by government censors, and that means they're real. Well, when a person, I understand that, but when a person takes it with a camera, there's a way to say, well, that picture's real and this one's real. There are thousands of photos of UFOs. There's hundreds of hours of video. And the government holds in their possession incredible troves of this stuff. NASA being number one, SpaceX number two. The corporation SpaceX, but under the control of DARPA. And one of the reasons, as I've mentioned, that Elon wanted to squeeze Isaacman to become the head of NASA is he wanted it all. He wants them all, a central database. Look at Doge, right? They wanted a central database of all these different things. So, you have to look at these things realistically and then say, why? What is it? They're still working on something in relation to this. That's part of the other problem going on here. And it's always been my contention that the levels that they've come to with it, that they know so much, they've advanced so far beyond the regular civilization, but there's something in that apotheum effect that takes place around the UFO file, the suspension of time, and the reality distortion physics that kicks in that still creates this level of secrecy that is far beyond the atomic bomb, for example, and nuclear research. That, I think we're starting to get into the territory there. And all you have to do to understand what apotheum is and maybe what they're studying is just go into regular cases. Go back to John Mack's cases, go back to Stanton Friedman, go back to Leonard Stringfield, understand that whole arc of contactees and watch what it is. This is what I did anyway to understand it. Watch what it is that happens to the people. What do they actually report, right? And they report teleportation. They report going through things. They report, in some cases, seeing dead relatives, like whatever it happens to be, loved ones that have passed on, and time stopping, and then if you look at the classic thing in the work of like John Keel or whatever, you see entire cities can be blacked out. Just like there was large scale UFO activity before the famous 1965 New York City blackout. And there were reports sending it up to LBJ, who's asking back and forth, what were the lights that were being seen before this took place? So, you've got a research track there that has nothing to do with, Lou Elizondo or Corbell or any of the circusy bad CIA stuff or just marketing stuff, whatever. All of that, the Intel circus, all those people, none of that has anything to do with what the real UFO file is. Those people just want to grandstand that the CIA got the digs. They got their hands on the core of people's belief about UFOs after blocking them from researching it for 80 years, so that's the triumph for them. And that's the sick thing that takes place in those systems. And, groups, when I say the CIA and stuff, those groups are all linked with the elites. They operate for the super wealthy. That's the deep state. Study the work of Professor Scott. You're getting someplace when you're looking at it that way. When you see people like Peter Thiel getting around the UFO file, run in the other direction. And I know there's a way to get at this and get at the heart of it. You just have to inform people that the intel people have nothing to offer in relation to the UFO file, because if they had anything to offer, they would be in violation of their group mandate, and they're not going to do that. So, and it's funny because it came up in my conversation with Alex today that Admiral Tim Gallaudet, he's out there talking away about this, like, oh, there's an NHI that's beyond sophisticated, operating on this planet, can control anything and all this stuff. He's somebody who's been fed tons of stuff by Mellon and Elizondo, and he's the kind of guy who I would say, it's almost like if you've been in a cult, you need to be deprogrammed. And there's a lot of them out there, but I would deprogram from all that stuff and get to the bottom of it. Yeah. Yes. Are there incredible anomalies in relation to this? Is the UFO file real? Absolutely. But their spin on it, their ridiculous threat spin and all the dollar signs in their eyes from what they can get on it, that has nothing to do with anything. That's not real. If you believe that, if you're sitting out there, those people that, like I said, were doing this kind of Reddit track with TTSA and thinking Jim Semivan from the CIA was giving them the truth, it's absurd. You just haven't studied it enough. That's the problem. And there's an incredible knowledge gap. There's an incredible potency gap. And there's also a lack of spirituality. So, there's a lot of tracks there. You can plug a lot of that knowledge, the people that we bring on this show, Gigi Young, Dr. Farrell, and other, you can get a handle on that knowledge, but you have to go for the potent side. If you are, worrying about Bridget Macron's sexual identity, you're not going to get anywhere. You might as well be playing a video game. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 225 UFO file alert. I almost said 226. I'm jumping ahead of the series.
You're time traveling.
Exotic tech bombshell, going deep. And by the way, I should mention there are great people out there doing research, and there's so many great people in the ideas room who send me information. And so I'm always learning, and this is part of what takes place in the middle of all this. And for people, like we deal with this subject on a weekly basis, you and I, in the ideas room. And, but the average person just online, they see like, hey, UFO files revealed by Trump administration or whatever. It really is, supposedly down to the normies, as they call them, right? Just but the average person. And a lot of what we can bring to them is, something where they can go, they have an avenue to go deeper. Okay. And they have an avenue to see things as they really, are, a better place to reason from, instead of this parade of, kind of CIA clown show stuff. I mean, that's worthwhile to give them the choice to take it somewhere else. Because, if you were just coming into this, you can only imagine the confusion an average person would have, because you have all the lies from the government, you have all the marketing from the companies. A lot of these companies that run the podcasts, and I've looked at their numbers in the background, huge numbers. They don't care about the subject. As a matter of fact, one of the most revealing things was an article from the Wall Street Journal, and I'm familiar with Dow Jones. I worked for those guys before, remember them well. And they always done very interesting and good articles in the background. And they did this article with Sean Ryan. And I always wondered about Sean Ryan, because I was like, he was this guy who was like, oh, I was doing videos in my attic, and then I'm interviewing the president and asking him about UFOs. I'm like, something weird about it all. And, nothing bad about him. I just was like, it seems odd to me. When I looked at him, I could never see a guy who was interested in UFOs. And so he's talking about this company that was taking over his podcast. I think it was like $12 million or something like that. And in the middle of it, he's like, in the article, they're giving them the laydown, the lay of the land. And the idea is basically like, oh yeah, we're going to set you up. You're going to do all this and stuff. And you're going to talk about UFOs, like we're just going to throw that in there because it's something that's appealing, I guess. It's some topical thing, but you see the companies, they're just thinking of it as a pop click, as a punchline for the whole thing. They don't care about civilization moving forward or anything like that. They just want podcasts that'll get, people to watch so they can run commercials basically. And so you can take somebody like a Sean Johnson or whoever, and not Sean Johnson, I'm sorry, what's his name?
You don't ask me.
No, Sean Johnson. No. I
don't know.
Sean Ryan. And he's going to go through this thing. No, Sean Johnson actually does a great podcast, and he just recently interviewed Alex, I think. No, it's Sean Ryan who I'm talking about. And and there's, I don't know anything about Sean Ryan's show, but I always thought it was weird. Oh yeah, why are you sitting there talking about like face melting ETs and stuff? And I think the reason is because it's part of the contract, like New Line Podcast has plugged me in with $12 million. What do you want me to talk about? And that's where I think a lot of this is coming from. Now, making money is a good thing. That's fine. But I don't think the sincerity is there in the field. And if you don't have the integrity in the field, like I said, you might as well be hawking video games at that point. All right.
Well, it's kind of, obviously, it's sort of like gossip. It's not.
It is.
It's not
Yeah.
making meaning.
Yes.
It's not about connecting dots.
No, a totally different thing.
It's not about creating understanding, and
right.
Which is what we're all about.
Yeah.
So there's a tapestry, I always say, that you are weaving, and you're taking this thread and that thread, and you're bringing them together, and all of us are making greater sense of the world that we share.
Oh, there's no question. I think about the time that I've spent with the work of Professor Scott. And I studied Professor Scott's work when I was in high school. So by the time I got to doing the show and having him as a guest and spending time talking with him and stuff, your life is transformed by the conversation, by the work of the person who's doing it. And so I guess in my mind, and there were a lot of people like that. And I've been lucky enough to work with them on some level over the years, like Jim Mars, the late Jim Mars. And those people added to the way that I think about life and the world and things of that nature. So,
Power structures.
Yeah.
What could be more important?
Yeah. That's exactly
How they
right.
actually operate.
Yeah, it's so different from, I have to say, and I'm an observer of this whole thing, just to kind of, step outside the show just for a minute, but I'm an observer of the entire space, and what I've seen happen is incredible amounts of corporate media money coming in here. And, I have people sending me links from like very, very incredibly bad, superficial podcasts and being like, hey, DJ, did you see this? The moon is hollow or something, and it's, I'm like, you look at it and you say, what hope does an average person have against all this money and marketing, And what's amazing is even one show, like what we try to do on this program and some of the people that we try to put forward as well, they can make all the difference, but we're up against a wall of noise, and, so the potency goes right out the window, and people confuse, like if we're talking about the UFO file or the Kennedy assassination or something like that versus, like Peter Thiel's podcast that he's funding, and if they talk about the same thing, see, their goals are different. And so the integrity's gone. First of all, you can feel that immediately. There's no integrity with it. And then it also doesn't have the core information. It just has the kind of flighty title, So you find yourself in a weird situation where you say, unless you really train yourself to go for potent information, it's almost not worth it with a lot of the stuff that's out there to even engage with it, because it's, in the end, it just ends up, in a confusing place, because a lot of the podcasts and things, they'll use certain trigger words, like, oh, the government is keeping such and such from it, but they're not investigating the government at all. They just think, that they like the pop click nature of the sound of the thing. So I think it's important. And one of the things we'll do going forward and with the ideas room is we're carving out a space that's different. I don't know where that goes, but it doesn't go to where the other junk goes. It's not an Intel money meat grinder, so I don't know. I can tell you this though. There's a great quote from David Bowie who says, I don't know where I'm going to go from here, but I can promise you this, it's going to be interesting. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Whew, a little bit of a kind of a mind drop there, because, so just sharing that with you is, gives me hope for the future. Because these are deep, deep issues. And, if they're rolling out even this light version of disclosure, we have to be in a much sharper place in the grand scheme of things. And there are tremendous people who can pick up the mantle and do that. And I try to make sure I associate with them. And I'm glad for all my super friends, shall we say. We are heading into the last track of X Series 225 here, the UFO file alert. And we'll take a couple more questions. You're up.
All right, I'm going to bundle a bunch of these because they're all related. Okay, so Bo Krill says, why now? Amarillo Gunrunner. So is this disclosure a distraction from the most unpopular war since 1972, or is it a move towards COG and onto a one-world government? Esoteric Portal says, are they waiting to have control of the global chessboard with Rothschild, central bank-free countries like Iran, and also implement CBDC before releasing the advanced UFO tech? And Jen Passavant says, government dries up energy costs and limits access. Oh, wait, looky here, advanced technology and free energy. All you need to do is use the CBDC for access.
There's a danger. Oh, yeah.
So we all know that we have debt that can never be paid, that America is basically bankrupt. And the whole world is, it seems, and that we need a global financial reset. Everybody's been talking about that. So how does that play into this UFO threat, UFO disclosure?
Yeah.
And all the AI data centers that are being fast-tracked, even though the public is protesting them.
Well, I have a special episode coming up on AI. But what I will say is this in relation to all of it, that at the heart of it is one system that is building up its own new system based off of the regular system, while the regular system, which is operating side by side with it. We've talked about overt, covert governments before, but the regular society that you and I understand is being siphoned off, and that money is disappearing into a black hole. And the advanced technology is related right in the heart of it because it takes tremendous amounts of energy and tremendous amounts of finances to do that. And they have arranged things in such a way that, they want to sell off our true assets, as we know, and basically, give us different types of clever coin and Bitcoin and things like of this nature. And, experimenting with all those things and trying those systems out doesn't bother me. But the idea of trading in our resources for them is very disturbing. I think the consolidation is on overdrive. And I think the way to stop it from going off a rail, like they're predicting that AI is going to take up a quarter of all the jobs out there in the next 5 years. Well, some people think the number is even much higher, but just thinking about a quarter of the jobs, think about the people in society, the quarter less of those people being able to have jobs. So we're in a totally different situation where we're going to need clarity in relation to things like the UFO file. We're going to need clarity in relation to who's controlling what the AI is doing and what their plans are, because we can't just let, the billionaire class run off with the script here. There's no question about it. The other thing I want to mention, and it's not brought up very much, but there is a connection with AI and the UFO file, and the figure who shepherded the UFO file gave us many of the AI companies commercially after the fact. And that figure, his name is Bobby Inman. And if you study his history, you're going to find him working and doing the founding of so many of these AI companies. I can't help but think, with his deep knowledge around the UFO file, if some of that research didn't splice in some aspect of whatever, you can call it alien, but did they splice that alien aspect into the AI? And is that why it's acting so strange and at times quite anti-human? So these are the questions we're going to need to drill down on. I don't think there's any question about that. But yeah, in terms of the digital control grid and what's, the centralizing of the situation, it was quite funny because just before I went on with Alex, he was talking to Edward Dowd. And, Dowd is interesting because he knows so much about the financial system, but he also realizes they could pull an emergency powers UFO threat system. It's not outside of the realm of his possibilities. So you see this kind of thing that we're getting to in our understanding. People from different quarters, when they look at it from their own expertise level, they can see that the aspect of the UFO file being used, you hear about it, you see people out there who are from very different fields coming in and weighing in and saying, there's something not right here about how this is being rolled out. And boy, is that true. Is that sort of intuition cutting through?
I think this is a very dangerous game they're playing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because people who were not, so many people were red pilled during COVID and are awake, and conspiracy theories are all the rage, as we know. Everybody's got a conspiracy theory podcast. We laugh about this all the time. But the normies that are still out there, right? The idea that UFOs, just even having this conversation, that we may have been visited, that Roswell may be real, that the government may have been keeping secrets. This could be revelatory for them.
Yeah.
And then when you start to wake up, you start to question everything.
Right. So this is a grab for control of the narrative is what's going on. They need to control the narrative. And that's why you see people like Peter Thiel laying down the big bucks to control the podcast space. That's why you see Sam Altman and people like that doing. They need to control what is said and spoken and researched about this. That's very important. They can't control the narrative. They're going to have to go back to the banning free speech aspect. And they're ready to do it. They did it in the UK. They've done it in other places in the most shameless fashion as well. So no, I agree with you. I think it is an incredible clash, shall we say. All right, what else have you
got? Nevin Moore says, DOJ speculated today that the Nazis had saucer space shaped crafts that were capable of hovering. Do they really think that's a revelation not already known? And School of Saw says, why did Barney Hill see Nazis in his abduction?
Well, he sees some really incredible things, and his descriptions are incredibly clear. I would say this, that the beings that the Hills interact with are a lot more human than Greys. I don't think they're Greys. Do you think they're Greys?
They don't seem like Greys.
No, they seem very much like some human offshoot of sorts. And that whole thing about the star maps and stuff, there could have been, they don't necessarily, that group that's here doesn't have to be extraterrestrial. They could be something totally different. And I think that the Hills case is so important to study because of their honesty and integrity. And also the fact that in Betty's past, her sister, before she had an encounter, had seen a UFO, and her grandmother, all the way back to 1933, had seen a UFO, if you study that family line. On Barney's side, the encounter with the aliens or whoever they were that took them on board was so disorienting that his whole life goes down. He actually never works a day after that encounter comes out. And he goes down and then he dies of a cerebral hemorrhage just 5 years later, So this is what can happen. Some people like Betty sort of took the experience in and thrived with it. But with somebody else, it doesn't hit everyone the same way. Some people who have the encounters, you can tell they've been through something absolutely real. And I don't just think they're my lab, military things, dressing up as aliens and grabbing them. I'm sure that's been done to get all kinds of data mining done. But this is a special case, the Betty and Barney Hill case. There's no doubt about it. And in terms of him seeing a Nazi, look, I always trust the description. If he thought he saw a Nazi, then he was probably seeing a Nazi. They had other things to say about, the beings, that they were short, their eyes were a little bit bigger, they didn't really have a nose, but they didn't have the big gray eyes thing. And when Betty Hill was asked about this later, she said, that's nothing like what I saw. They're people, they were just different, kind of slightly different people. So there's a great thing to be studied in those tapes and in that case. I don't think there's any doubt about it. We can get a lot just from that. And there are so many cases like theirs. The question is, what does that whole phenomena represent? And it's not just military hardware and the Golden Dome and CIA people trying to, mind control you with alien threats and all the rest of it. It doesn't have anything to do with that.
Well, is the alien threat, I mean, we've always talked about it like with COG, but is it their get out of jail free card? Because
Yes.
that's their justification for the breakaway civilization. That's their justification for stealing all our money and developing all this technology behind the scenes. Is it because, scary spacemen?
Yeah, they can't govern. They don't have the numbers to govern. It's funny. Trump got the numbers to govern by being a populist. But he has been acting more like an internationalist and empire-driven guy with the Iran war. And what happens? His numbers have gone down like that since the Iran war started. So they don't, just like Justin Trudeau in Canada, when he was pushing all this COVID stuff and then his numbers went down, they threw him out. They don't have the numbers to govern. So ultimately what they need is emergency powers, And I go back, I've gone through different countries, France and others, and they cannot, with the policies that they have, get, the ability to govern based on the policies that they have, which are absurd. Same thing is going on with Starmer's leadership in the UK and other places. So the emergency, when you say get out of jail free card, it's very interesting because it's a very attractive solution for them. However, it carries a lot of risks as well. One of the great risks is you're pulling a false Project Bluebeam type alien invasion and the real thing shows up, right? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, X Series 225, UFO file alert. We've all gone through the Trump somewhat lukewarm disclosure today, but it puts us in an interesting timeline, shall we say. We're going to take a couple more questions and then we're done for the night. Miss Olivia, you choose.
Quad 57, if they are parking craft in the rings of Saturn, at what point should we consider them a threat?
Well, it's true. I mean, part of the problem is that the threat part has been overplayed so hard and heavy by these intel groups that you can't even see what could be, what the nature of the thing is. But let's face it, they can outdo our craft so easily. And of course, it was Gordon Cooper who talked about the incredible abilities that he saw the flying saucers do, that they could imitate anything that he did. They could take off in a heartbeat, So their technology is so beyond ours that if it was the human mentality of a war situation, they could have, removed the human race a long time ago. So it's not that. It's not an invasion from space, whatever it is. But the threat that is represented there maybe goes into them integrating themselves into the human fabric and into the human DNA line and things of this nature, which is what they have expressed an interesting effort to do, and which is never brought up by the CIA people because, the only thing they want to get into your head is shoot those demons out of the sky, right? But no, what you see if you really study the UFO file and you study the whole contactee aspect, when the DNA aspect is manipulated, somebody, and this is where the more mystical, etheric side of looking at the situation comes into play. Somebody's trying to integrate themselves into that human DNA line. And they seem to have played out their own genetics, whoever they are. Let's be honest about that. Are they a group that's here, that's played themselves out, scientifically more advanced than we are? You got to look at it. I'm going to read a quote here to close off everything from this book, which I always recommend, The Children of Roswell, if you want to get around the Roswell situation. But this, again, to close on our theme of the memory metal, what it was all about, etc. Other military personnel were also said to have kept pieces of the UFO wreckage for themselves. Major Jesse Marcel, the first military person to the crash site on the Brazel Foster Ranch, was said to have buried a piece of so-called memory metal under a concrete patio in the back of the house, West 7th Street, Roswell. Or maybe it was placed in a seam somewhere in the extensive stone wall that encased the backyard of the house. Now, what's interesting is on his deathbed, he was telling another abductee or an abductee, UFO abductee, that downstairs in his house in Louisiana, on top of the water heater, in a special compartment, he kept a piece of the memory metal because he always wanted to be able to say, no, this is the real thing. This is what they hid from you. And the abductee was Kelvin Parker, and he recounts the story very clearly. And at a certain point, Jesse tells him, this is why I think Jesse's house was bugged, but he tells him to go down and retrieve it and look at it. He tells him how to take the top off the water heater and see the piece of memory metal. And, but what happens is someone shows up at the door and they act, they're known to Jesse, and he's like, he's like, no, don't do it now that they're here. And the person's kind of hostile. And basically, Kelvin Parker leaves with plans to come back in a few days, and then Jesse dies. So, they have ways and means, but you can see there was a network for preserving this memory metal in different circles. And it says, we checked the stone wall without any luck, but the concrete patio now forms the base floor of one of the rooms inside the house. None of the owners of the house, since we have been on the case, have been sympathetic to our requests to play Geraldo Rivera with one of the interior floors. Right across the street from the old Marcel house stands the old residence of the former public information officer, Walter Hout. We knew Walter as a friend for many years until his passing. We suspected, but he did not confirm it until the release of the sealed statement after his death, the extent of his true involvement in the 1947 UFO crash retrieval. Hout had indeed visited one of the crash sites and was later seen showing a piece of the wreckage that he had had in his own personal possession to some of his cohorts at the base, as had been told to us a few years earlier by one of his subordinates. So there's a huge network of people, little traces of this memory metal. So you can see something volatile in the middle of it all. Human beings having access to this incredible technology that through those labs would be redeveloped into remarkable properties. So this is where the missing scientist story comes into the crux of a classic UFO story. And if we can measure those two out together, then we're really going somewhere with all this. Miss Olivia, your final question of the night.
I don't want to ask the final question.
Yes.
I got too many good things. I do want to ask you. Okay, so Roger C says no off-world entities are allowed to interfere with Earth's evolution. They are merely curious and came here after the U.S. atomic blast in the upper atmosphere in the late 40s/early 50s. So I'm thinking, and I come back to this thought often about whether they're reptilians or not, is if a deal has been struck with the so-called elites for immortality tech, and that they have to eliminate a certain number of the population of the planet, that's the orders they've been given. For whatever reason, maybe we're overpopulated, maybe they want to take the space that we're taking up now. And and they will then be given this special technology so that they, with their billions, can live forever.
Interesting.
Whether it's they're uploading their consciousness to a cyborg kind of manufactured body or whatever.
Yes.
So, science fiction tells us a lot.
Well,
There's a partnership. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
As crazy as it sounds, that there is a partnership going on, and it is not for the plebes' benefit.
I think it's reasonable, because of the amount of stories that have come out, to think of the idea that on a leadership level, we've interacted with some other group that's not human. And, but I also think that, the earth is run by, it's a physical world. It's a physical incarnation world. If you look at the mystery schools and their work, you have to see it as you've got all types of different levels of life. You've got elementals, and the elementals are a gigantic, diverse life group in and of itself. So, it's funny because in a way, like the alien aspect, even as it comes up, is just one part of looking at things, because, what is it that those mystery traditions tell us? They tell us there are elementals. They tell us there are discarnates, like ghosts, astral beings, right? And there are beings who come forward in the etheric and can command whole cultures. Kukulkan, he came forward and ran the entire Mayan civilization. In Steiner's work, that's an etheric being that the priests are communicating with. So you've got different levels of intelligence and things of that nature. So the idea of just dealing with this, one thing about, there's a science fiction culture coming over here in spaceships and, that's it. You're dealing with a lot of different characters and aspects. And I will say that if we are capable of developing technology on this planet, then it's possible that there's another group here with us who's capable of doing it and are more advanced. So are they more advanced because they're operating with ancient technology from a period when we were advanced? It's quite possible. Remember, humanity's great problem is that humanity forgets, right? And I'm going to leave that question lingering in the air and wrap up the session for tonight. Miss Olivia, you're up.
Okay. So Bo Krill says, ask DJ real quick about the Nixon time capsule. DJT going to surprise us soon? What's he think?
Well, when they were digging up that ballroom in the White House, you had to wonder, did Nixon tell Trump about the time capsule for disclosure that he kept in the White House? It's a fantastic question. It's a hard one to answer, but I can tell you when I dealt with Merritt, I asked him so many different ways about his interactions with Nixon. And regardless of the nature, the way I came at it, his answers were always exactly spot on and the same. So I always believed that Merritt's core story was true, and so I believe the time capsule story. And I think it just hangs out there as this remarkable piece. But then Nixon had run CIA Blue Book, which was the real UFO investigations. The whole stories about him and Jackie Gleason and him showing him the alien bodies. I mean, Nixon was deep, deep in the UFO file. So I guess the answer is yes. Miss Olivia, your super chats,
Okay.
please.
All right. Let me just finish this. Okay. Nevermore said, "What are DJ's thoughts on the Spielberg movie Disclosure Day release the first week of June 2026? Coincidental to this DOJ release?"
Oh, he knew something.
This has all been planned. This
No
whole
question.
the whole idea that
I'm glad we came around to that because we started the show with that. And let's not forget Close Encounters, 1977. It's a 50-year arc for Spielberg working with these people. I mean, does he want to be there at the triumph of it? Absolutely. He might even think he's doing something good for humanity. This is what's hilarious. So God knows what they told him, like, oh, this is great. It'll set humanity on a path of universal brotherhood. And all they want to do is create a UFO threat for totally different purposes, right? So, yeah, we have to have a much broader conversation. It needs to get out of the phony, weaponized BS and all that stuff, and out of the CIA circus, Chris Mellon's fake whistleblowers, and all that stuff. And you're not going to get the real full answer from the government. This is the other weird thing. But I think the government moving into this phase where it's, saying, well, we're disclosing, we're doing transparency, is very important on a government level because maybe that administration is thinking we'll get that control back for the UFO file. But because Trump wants the Golden Dome and UFO grid and all that stuff, the defense contractors just want to basically create a slave planet and then a slave star system, So those are the forces that are active there. All right, your super chats are up.
All right. Tommy Van Gumpel, Ray Story, Harry Zeri, Helena Wilcox, Eurythmia's Fun, Rick Layer's Daughter, Martin Graham, Wolfgang McCarthy, Medley Childress, J.M. Parsons, Brian Whitaker, Amarillo Gunrunner, M. Brox, Leo Roaring Ohm, Race Vibration, Vulcanelli, Debbie McAdoo, Erica Swenson Elliott, Mike Brosnahan, Stephen Northcutt, Mermaid Moxie, and Prague Snob 14.
Wow, fantastic. We really appreciate your support. And to all our subscribers, we couldn't do what we do without you. So thank you very much. And for your continued support. And, we'll make sure that your support goes into the right places with the right stories, etc. And I'll do some shout outs here before we leave. And there's a story I'm looking at about lost JFK assassination tapes at Los Alamos. And that is very interesting to me, considering what we've been talking about here on The Missing Scientists as well. Michael McCasland is there. We've got...
You're going to be on Alex Jones tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. From when to when?
Oh, no, I'll be on with Alex at 2:00.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll cover... I'll be covering more of the disclosure aspects that are going on here. And next week, we're going to do a super run on this whole thing. I'm going to spend a little more time with that release. This is going to be, it's going to be pretty wild. We also have some exciting interviews coming up for you as well. Will this be on the test? Scarlet Fire. There she is. Let's see. Who else have we got? Tater Mountain. All right. Nat Boy. Oh boy. Bethany G. Carol Rosen says for U.S. to build a golden peace dome for peace in space. Yeah. Well, good luck with that, unfortunately. Everything's the Department of War, the Space War domain. Yeah, we're coming in, baby. Unfortunately, it's highly unpopular. And the Department of Defense is much better. Okay. When are you going on Alex Jones again? Yes, it will be tomorrow.
And it's
indeed.
2:00 Eastern time, right?
Deep State, you're fired. Thank you. Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, tomorrow, 2:00 Eastern. It's going to be a blast. It'll be a blast. Alex in that new studio is all fired up. So I'll take as much caffeine as I can get to keep up with them. All right. Right. AJM. That's what they're calling it now. And yes. Let's see. Bo Krills, yay, AJ and DJ equals firework. Bo Krills, I have to say your avatar is one of the wildest, crazy things. One of these days you're going to explain it, sir. Fantastic indeed. Deep State, you're fired. Who else you got there? I know Gigi was out there. Gigi just did an outstanding show about spirituality before Christ. Whoa, incredible. Incredible. And also, I think some weird things happened with it when I went to watch it. It said YouTube can't license this video. And I was like, it's very weird games going on with that stuff. And so, yeah, make sure that you check that out. Gigi Young, of course, fantastic work. And we're going to have Gigi on very shortly. You almost got an interview with Dr. Farrell this weekend, but the weather really took him out badly. So he'll be, but he's coming up in the next couple of weeks here. So fantastic indeed. Good night to you, sir. Richard Fretz as well. And Najat is out there. Fantastic. What a great ideas from tonight. Mermaid Moxie, I am a tall white, says Chris Brook. You know, this is the ideas room when you're talking about the tall whites. Good night, Olivia Wingsgirl from Najat, of course. Kilroy was here. Yes, I'm Kilroy, Mr. Roboto. Don't forget it. You are not here by chance. Excellent point. I totally agree with that. There's only so much chance to go around, as it were. Everyone, it's great to see so many of you out there in the Dark Journalist Ideas Room. We will see you all next week. And I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. And wait, it's Dave Rabbit Nam T-shirts by DJ. Yes.
Will you be watching any of Dr. Greer's UFO press conference this weekend?
You know, if we hear anything interesting about it, I think of those as kind of like
UFO light.
They're kind of like classic get-togethers and stuff. I don't expect anything too remarkable to come out. We kind of know the theme there, but no, I'll always, you know, you never know who might pop up. So, and good luck to them, right? Have you ever been to Japan? They have interesting UFO history. Interesting. Wow. I have not been to Japan, but I could see where they would, and it would be an interesting trip. Coffee is the elixir of life. Woo. Absolutely. Wow. I could end right there on that one. Good night, everyone. Excellent show. Thank you, Jen Passavant. Great to see you out there. We will see you all next week. And you know, it says end broadcast, but after all,
never really ends.
Never really ends. And never let it be forgot that once there was a Camelot, and there could be again if we get the right people at the top. And that all comes from the consciousness of the regular, everyday citizens making the difference on a daily basis, as so many of us do out there. And I see it on a daily basis. And, you know, you have to do, you know, in your heart, you must have the hope for humanity in these situations. So remember, humanity, the bottom line, they will not let you down. And so keep that in mind. And we will see you all next week. Sweet dreams, DJ and Olivia. Rest your voice, DJ. Well, forget it. No, there's only more spending of the voice going on. This is interesting. Leroy Jenkins, Bo Krills again, almost gets the last word of the night. That's pretty good. I have no idea what you're talking about. Only to troll. Okay, it worked. Bo Krills, you get the troll on that one. No, it's great to have you here, sir. Dr. Greer has a Discord server, says Johnny Ricardo. Well, that's interesting. That's probably he's got a lot of stuff to share. He holds one of my very favorite whistleblower videos, where he's interviewing this gentleman, and it's a very early adoption of chipping that they're talking about, the technology that's going around. And so those very early interviews with these people who were like, hold on to these videos until I die, kind of thing. Happy birthday to me and the day Madame Blavatsky died. That's right. It's May 8th, the special rededication day of Theosophy for Madame Blavatsky. Fantastic. Thank you for the updates. And so a fantastic night, everyone. Great show. Great to be with you. We'll see you tomorrow on Alex, and then back with you here next week. Just a fantastic things going on right now. So we'll see you all very, very soon.
Okay. God bless everybody.
Until then, sleep tight.